Nelly the Monster Sitter, Grerks, Squurms and Water Greeps by Kes Gray, read by Kate Sachs. "If monsters are real, how come I've never seen one?" said Nelly. "Because they never go out," said her dad. "Well, why don't monsters ever go out?" said Nelly. "Because they can never get a babysitter," said her dad. Nelly thought about it. Her mum and dad never went out unless they could get a babysitter. Why should monsters be any different? "Then I shall become Nelly the Monster Sitter," smiled Nelly. The Grerks at number 55. Chapter 1. There were 4 drawers in Petronella Morton's bedside cabinet. 3 were as dull as school. 1 was extra special, with a secret hidden inside. Nelly, as she much preferred to be called, knelt down excitedly in front of drawer number 4 and slowly eased it open. Her eyes dropped inside and fell upon the crisp, clean folds of a freshly ironed pair of blue and pink stripy pyjamas. She lifted the pyjamas up slightly, counted 4 jumpers down, and then slipped her fingers into the fold beneath. A spark ignited in both her eyes as her fingers withdrew the secret from its hiding place. She lay it on her lap, paused for a moment, and then stroked it lovingly with the tips of her fingers. It was a lime green hot water bottle, made in Taiwan, do not overfill. Nelly cradled it in her lap for a moment, and then opened the flat end of the water bottle like a pita bread. Unbeknown to her family, she had changed the use of the water bottle entirely by slicing open the widest end with a craft knife, creating a secret cavity inside. She slipped her fingers into the cavity and pulled out her pride and joy. It was an A4 pad, spiral-bound. The plain red cover had been transformed by the addition of a large, handwritten title rendered with silver and gold glitter pens. The title of the book read, Nelly the Monster Sitter's Secret Monster Sitting Notebook, in gold. "Keep out or else!" double underlined in silver, 3 exclamation marks. Nelly's secret monster sitting notebook was for Nelly's eyes only. Not that Nelly was a secretive girl. Indeed, she shared nearly all of her innermost thoughts with her family, not including her sister Astilby. She'd simply learnt that some of the things that she saw when she went monster sitting were best kept to herself. You know, gunky, slimy, spiky stuff that other people can find scary or hair-raising. Monster sitting was Nelly's special thing. None of her friends would ever dare babysit for a family of monsters or even knock on a monster's front door. Just about everyone Nelly knew, including her twin sister, Asti, as she much preferred to be called, thought that monsters were freaks to be avoided rather than neighbours to be welcomed. But then Nelly wasn't like most other children, or people for that matter. She had a heart the size of an air balloon, and nerves as steady as an oil rig. Thankfully for Nelly, her mum and dad were generous-spirited too. From day one, they'd been totally fine with Nelly's idea of helping monsters to get out of the house a little bit more. Nelly's dad was of the mind that babysitting for monsters would be educational. Nelly's mum was hoping it might help Nelly with her table manners. For sure, Nelly was lucky to have parents like Clifford and Yvonne Morton. She opened her secret notebook and flicked randomly past some pages headed in her own handwriting, hodgepodges, whizzles, and glueballs. She found the next empty page and pulled the lid off a gel pen with her teeth. At the top of the page, in her best purple, she wrote the heading, Grerks, and then followed it with 3 dots. 3 dots meant more info later. Nelly was penciled into her diary to monster sit later that evening. She'd never monster sat a Grerk before, and it wouldn't be until she returned home later that evening that she would be able to complete her notes. She knew what Grerks sounded like over the telephone. In fact, she'd mistaken their squeaking squawks for a squiddle. But as for appearances, were they scaly? Were they spiky? Or slimy? Or furry? For Nelly, half the fun was guessing. The other half was finding out. The Grerks from number 55 had asked Nelly if she could monster sit from 6 until 8 that evening. It was 20 to 6 already, and Nelly hadn't even sat down for her tea. She slipped her secret notebook back into its water bottle and placed it carefully back into the drawer. She was pushing the drawer shut when the handle on her bedroom door began to twist, rattle, and shake. "Why have you locked it?" shouted her sister from the other side of Nelly's bedroom door. "So Barbies can't get in," shouted Nelly, who most days of the week didn't get on with her sister much, and the other days of the week didn't get on with her at all. "Let me in now or I'll tell Mum," shouted Asti. Nelly ignored her sister's protests and opened the door of her wardrobe instead. She took out her favourite, coolest sweatshirt and laid it on the bed. It was purple with an orange trim, and it had the word sardine transfer printed across the chest in big swirly silver letters. No one, including Nelly, understood why the word sardine had been printed on the sweatshirt, but that was precisely why Nelly liked it, because it was different. As she tied back her licorice black hair with a yellow scrunchie, the bedroom door handle rattled furiously again. "Let me in!" squawked Asti. Nelly smiled, opened the door and barged past her sister. "Freak lover," said Asti. "Bog tentacle," said Nelly. Asti placed her hands on her hips and glared at the back of Nelly's purple sweatshirt as it breezed past her in the direction of the stairs. She wasn't as quick-thinking as Nelly and needed time to upgrade her next insult. The words smelly, freako, and weirdo bandied about in her brain, but by the time she'd hit upon gunge lover, Nelly had disappeared from view. As usual, Nelly was 10 steps ahead of her sister. She bounced down the stairs and wheeled towards the kitchen in the faint hope that tea might be ready and waiting for her on the table. But as usual, a bottle of tomato sauce was the only thing on offer. Mealtime had never been a simple affair in Nelly's house. Her mum was a vegetarian, her dad was descended from a lion, her sister was a fusspot, and Nelly didn't like carrots. Actually, she secretly didn't mind carrots, but seeing as everyone else in her family was so picky about what they ate, she'd decided to have a mealtime no-no of her own. Nelly walked into the kitchen and found her mum looking perplexed. She was staring at the kitchen counter, trying to work out what she could cook for everyone that would involve the minimum amount of effort and the least amount of washing up. "Mum," said Nelly, "is tea ready? 'Cause I'm monster sitting at 6 and I need to leave at 10 to." Nelly's mum stared blankly at the ingredients in front of her, replacing the chicken nuggets with a frozen herring and then swapping a tin of macaroni cheese for 3 large sticks of celery and an avocado. "Oh, I do wish you liked carrots, Nelly. It would make life so much easier," said her mum, trying to shift the blame onto Nelly's shoulders. "Why don't we have a takeaway?" suggested Nelly, sensing an opportunity to avoid her mum's cooking. Nelly's mum threw her arms up into the air. "Brilliant idea," she said, sweeping the avocado and celery back into the vegetable rack and tossing an assortment of tins back into the carousel. "A pizza it is." "Can we order it for 8 o'clock?" asked Nelly. "I'll be back just after." "Brilliant, brilliant," said Nelly's mum, bending the herring back into an overly full compartment of the freezer. "I'll go and put my feet up for a couple of hours. I could do with a break. I wonder what's on telly." "The usual Saturday night rubbish," said Nelly's dad, limping into the kitchen from the garden. "It's always rubbish telly on a Saturday." "Why are you sucking your thumb, Dad?" asked Nelly. "Snowball," winced her dad. "You've been poking your fingers through the rabbit cage again, haven't you?" said her mum. "You know Snowball only likes Nelly." It was true. The Morton family rabbit was a one-person rabbit, as white as snow and as fluffy as thistledown. He lived in a hutch on the patio, making regular day trips to the lawn, courtesy of a portable rabbit run. He looked as cutesy-wootsy as a bunnykins could look, But lurking beneath that little twitchy nose and those soft whiskers was a killerkins, 2 needle-sharp teeth with enough strength to crunch through a steel carrot and meet in the middle. Nelly had never been sure why Snowball had singled her out as his one true friend in the world, but hey, if it made Asti jealous, it had to be a good thing. Nelly's dad threw a pitiful glance at his wife and then limped to the kitchen sink. Nelly's dad always limped when he was looking for sympathy. "Why are you limping again?" asked Nelly's mum. "You'll be telling me the rabbit tripped you up as well next." "Maybe Snowball picked Dad up, swung him round his head and body slammed him onto the patio," laughed Nelly. Nelly's dad sighed. If he was looking for sympathy, then he was most certainly in the wrong room at the wrong time with the wrong people. Things tipped slightly more in his favour with the arrival of Asti. "Oh, you poor love," she cooed, seeing that her dad was in mild distress and seizing the opportunity to gain some major brownie points. Nelly groaned inwardly as her sister ran across the kitchen and threw her arms around her dad's waist. "Oh, that's nasty. Is it deep?" she gushed. "How did it happen?" "Snowball," gasped her dad bravely. "Oh, I hate that rabbit," snapped Asti angrily. "We should have it put down before someone gets killed." Nelly looked at her mum. Nelly's mum looked at Nelly's dad. Everyone looked at Asti. For a girl with very little imagination, she had certainly surpassed herself this time. Asti tried to backtrack. "OK, not killed exactly, but what if Snowball bit someone and they got myxomatosis or something? What then?" No one was convinced. "Oh, I give up," sighed Asti, glaring at her dad and then flouncing back upstairs to put on some more cherry lip gloss. "It's only a nip, and anyway, you should be on my side because I was on yours." Nelly looked at her watch and sidled towards the front door. "I'll be back just after 8, she said, writing the Grerks' telephone number and house number on a pink post-it note and sticking it on the hall mirror by the front door. "Can I have an American hot with extra hot chilies, please?" requested Nelly, "and some garlic bread to ward away evil Asties." "Oh, stop winding your sister up," growled her mum. "And don't forget to leave the Grerks' telephone "I've stuck it in the usual place," said Nelly, grabbing her coat from its coat hook and opening the front door. "I hope some disgusting 12-headed swamp monster eats you," cackled Asti from the top of the stairs. "They always lose their appetite once I've told them about you," smiled Nelly. Asti wavered at the top of the stairs, stung by another quick-fire Nellyism. But before she had time to even raise her foot to stamp it, Nelly had skipped triumphantly into the front garden and closed the door. "Gunge lover!" shouted Asti, rather belatedly, even by her standards. Chapter 2. For Nelly Morton, monster sitting was a chance to be like her sweatshirt. Different. Especially different from her sister, Asti. Life can be so samey when you're a twin. Everyone expects you to be one half of the same person, to wear the same clothes, to do the same things, to feel the same way. Everyone jumps to the same samey conclusions about you both, and yet Nelly wasn't like Asti at all. OK, she and Asti were similar-ish to look at, but in every other way they were as different as no and yes. Nelly wasn't afraid of monsters. Asti was. Nelly thought monsters were lovely. Asti didn't. Nelly didn't mind shaking a 7-fingered paw. Asti did. Nelly was happy to play leapfrog with a 4-foot-tall amphibious creature with long, dangly tentacles and suckers on its forehead. Asti wasn't. Being a monster sitter had given Nelly the chance to prove it. Monsters were Nelly's own special territory. Only 6 months after placing her first monster-sitting advertisement in the local paper, Sweet Street and the whole of the Montelimar Estate had become Nelly's special monster-sitting patch. She never monster-sat for money. She did it mostly to be helpful, but also for the excitement. For on each occasion she'd monster-sat, whether she turned left out of the gate or right out of the gate, a monster adventure had loomed. She was sure that this evening would be no different. The street that Nelly lived in was a very long street. busyish with traffic during the early and late parts of the day, but quieter during the afternoon hours. Nelly's house was located somewhere roughly in the middle. Roughly is probably the wrong word to use because there was nothing rough about Sweet Street at all. At weekends especially, when people swapped their cars for lawnmowers, it was really a very pleasant street to live in. Sweet Street was a very respectable street, a very safe street. It was neat and tidy in the garden department and crowned either side with pollarded lime trees. The lime trees and that strange P word had become a huge talking point in the street that winter. One crisp February day, Nelly had watched a tree surgeon in a fluorescent orange jacket lop all the branches off the limes with a chainsaw. Apparently, that's what pollarding means, chopping all the branches off right down to the trunk. Even now, late into spring, as Nelly walked in the direction of number 55, she was still unsure of the results. Basically, the trees didn't look like trees anymore. Without their branches, the spindly growth that had sprouted from the stumps on top made them look like giant shaving brushes. She'd thought of protesting to Greenpeace about it, but had decided they were probably too busy saving whales. 12 shaving brushes further down the street, Nelly began to take notice of the house numbers that were approaching. Number 55 was an odd number. That meant that on this particular monster visit, there would be no need for her to cross the road. She glanced low along the garden walls of the houses that she was nearing. The first set of polished brass letters read number 73. She guessed there were about 10 more houses to go. Scaly, 4 ears and 2 heads. I bet that's what a Grerk looks like. Or maybe 3 heads, she mused. For Nelly, one of the best bits about monster sitting was guessing what a monster family would look like before she actually met them. Her eyes streamed across the tops of a line of privet hedging and then darted diagonally across, trying to glean a clue from the colour of the front door. 63, 61, 59, 57, 55. 4 eyes, smiled Nelly to herself. A purple front door always means 4 eyes. She paused at the front gate, adjusted her scrunchie, and then ironed her sweatshirt with the palms of her hand. First impressions were very important to Nelly. So was being on time. She looked at her watch. It was 5:59 and 47 seconds. She composed herself for 13 seconds, walked jauntily down the path to the purple front door, and pressed the custard yellow doorbell hard with her finger. The doorbell gurgled loudly. Definitely 4 heads, she smiled to herself. Or I'm a Grimp's hairdo. Chapter 3. The moment her finger released the doorbell, a fearsome, wolfish growl erupted in the hallway on the other side of the door. Nelly stared at the purple high-gloss door and stood her ground. Squeaks and squawks were approaching now. The low, rasping sound of a heavy bolt sliding back was quickly followed by the rattle of a chain being released from its keep. Nelly stood straight backed as the door of number 55 opened slowly with a creak. Nelly's eyes skyscrapered to the top of the door. A pink, onion-sized eye was staring inquisitively down at her. Nelly's eyes lowered and were met by a second eye. She dropped her sights again and began counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3. 4 pink eyes were socketed like traffic lights inside a huge cabbage-green head that ballooned from a starched white shirt collar and tie like a huge bubblegum bubble. Nelly held her nerve as a pair of thin, amphibious lips broke into a broad, welcoming smile. "Are you Nelly the monster sitter?" asked the goofy-toothed mouth with a shrill, squeaking squawk. "That's me!" gasped Nelly, jumping backwards down the path as a second head with 2 orange dangly tongues suddenly appeared from the bottom of the door and lunged in the direction of her knees. "You must be the Grerks!" A squeaking, squawking commotion erupted from behind the door as the 4 eyes at the top tried to keep track of the 2 tongues at the bottom. Nelly kept her distance and watched curiously as first the door closed, then reopened, then closed again. When it reopened for the third time, it swung back all the way. 2 large green amphibious monsters were now standing in the hallway. One of them was cradling a smaller and considerably wriggly monster in its arms.
"We're so sorry about that, Nelly,"
said the Grerk that still had all 3 of its tentacles dangling free.
"We hope he didn't frighten you. He gets so excited when he sees strangers. Please let me introduce ourselves. My name is Scroot, and this is my wife, Pumice, and this is our beautiful little baby, Glug."
Nelly stepped forward and held out her hand. "I'm very pleased to meet you," she said, interpreting 10 twinkling eyes and 2 dangling tongues as an invitation to enter the house. Nelly followed the green scaly tips of the Grerks' tails as they snaked along the hallway past a pasting table piled high with rolls of purple, hairy wallpaper. It was the strangest hallway she had ever seen. The walls were dark and hairy, but the floorboards were light and bare. The skirting boards that ran the length of the hall were fluorescent pink, and the ceiling was a swirling hodgepodge of yellows, greens, and browns.
"Mind the bucket,"
squawked Pumice, leading Nelly into the house.
"We're in the middle of redecorating."
Nelly looked down at a large turquoise bucket full to the brim with a pea-green slop.
"Sorry about the mess,"
squeaked Scroot. "No need to apologise," said Nelly, skirting her way around the bucket. "I'm thinking of having a bit of a change around in my bedroom too."
"Well, if you need any wallpaper, we've got lots of rolls left over,"
laughed Scroot. "I don't think I'm strong enough to hang wallpaper that heavy," said Nelly, suspecting that one roll alone probably weighed as much as a shaggy dog.
"Quick-drying monster paste, that's all you need,"
squeaked Pumice, pointing to the bucket.
"And a big brush,"
squawked Scroot. Nelly smiled and followed the Grerks into the lounge. There she found another room of the house in total disarray. There were tins of lemon and black spotted paint piled up by the window, pink and brown gooey swatches daubed onto the bare walls, and a large strip of hairy wallpaper slapped slapdash to the wall behind the sofa. At least Nelly assumed it was a sofa. It was hard to tell because all the furniture in the room was wrapped up in silver foil.
"It protects the fabric,"
said Pumice, preempting Nelly's question. Nelly sat down with a soft aluminium crunch and stared at the yet-to-be decorated walls.
"We can't decide whether to go hairy or slimy in here,"
said Scroot.
"We've been decorating for days and we need a break. We're so pleased you could come round, Nelly, and look after our lovely little baby for us."
"My pleasure," said Nelly, easing back onto her sofa and smiling politely across the room at her boggle-eyed hosts.
"Isn't he uglyful?"
squeaked Pumice, kissing Glug tenderly on the nose with her purple rosebud lips. Scroot joined his wife proudly on the sofa, placing 2 tentacles around her shoulder and the other along the back of the settee. Nelly smiled politely and then took a moment to weigh up the features of the 3 monsters that were sitting before her. There was something that she couldn't quite work out. Glug looked so different to Pumice and Scroot it wasn't true. For a start, he had 2 eyes instead of 4. He had 2 tongues instead of 1, and 6 legs instead of 2. He sat low and squat like a spider-legged pig, and he had 5 tails that wouldn't stop wagging. Even if you put his wriggliness down to the exuberance of youth, and even if you completely discounted the blue satin bow that was fixed to the top of his head, the dissimilarity between Glug and his parents was quite striking. Nelly watched as Pumice lowered Glug gently down on the floor and then braced herself as his 2 orange tongues came slobbering and slavering her way.
"He likes you,"
squealed Pumice.
"Look, I've never seen his tails wag so fast."
Nelly slid off the armchair onto her knees and welcomed Glug with open arms. It was big for a baby, about the size of a goat, and boy could he lick. Nelly closed her eyes and pursed her lips. Whichever way she turned, a tongue was waiting to greet her. "If you don't mind me saying," she gasped between slurps, "he doesn't look very much like you." Pumice and Scroot turned to each other. Their pink onion eyes blinked softly at one another, and then one by one their thin reptilian lips cracked open with uncontrollable laughter.
Of course he doesn't look like us, Nelly. He's a gog. Glug isn't a Grerk. He's a gog. Don't you have gogs at home, Nelly?
Nelly grimaced as Glug used his tongue like a pasting brush to slap saliva across her ear, and then giggled as she realised her mistake. "We have dogs, not gogs," blurted Nelly, deciding that she'd had quite enough Glug slobber for one visit. Fending him off with one arm, she eased herself back onto the silver foil and wiped her face with her sleeve. Sensing that the fuss was over, Glug turned his attentions elsewhere, scurrying across the floor, jumping back into Pumice's lap, and flipping over expectantly onto his back.
"Oh, he loves having his tum tickled,"
said Pumice, obliging with all three tentacles. Nelly smiled uncertainly. She'd never babysat a monster pet before.
"He's no ordinary gog either, Nelly," boasted Scroot. "Glug is a pedigree best of breed golden revolver. He's been supreme ugly champion at grunts for the last 3 years running. And tomorrow you're going to win again, aren't you, ugly fool?"
said Pumice, giving his hairy tum an extra scratch.
"We're going to buy our Gluggy Wuggy a beautiful new bow and a sparkling new collar for tomorrow's show, aren't we?"
Nelly didn't know what to say. She knew that surprises always lurked behind a monster's front door, but she'd never given a moment's thought to gog-sitting. She smiled warily as Pumice lifted Glug down onto the floor, stood up and brushed herself down.
"We really should be off, Nelly, before the late-night shopping ends. We have to buy some more pedigree gog food, too. Would it be all right if we leave you a couple of instructions before we go?"
Nelly stood up dutifully and followed Pumice and Scroot into the kitchen. "Of course you can," she said, scanning the spotlessly clean surfaces of the pink and lime-green stripy kitchen units. Scroot opened a kitchen cupboard door, reached up high with a tentacle, and slapped some suckers around a large tin of alligator chunks.
"It's very important that you give Glug his dinner at 7 o'clock. Champion show gogs have a very carefully controlled dietary routine. Remember, Nelly, 7 o'clock, no later, no sooner."
Nelly turned and looked at Glug, who was panting excitedly by her feet. "I promise I'll remember," smiled Nelly. "Can you leave me out a tin opener?" Pumice plunged her tentacles into a kitchen drawer and placed the tin opener on top of the tin of alligator chunks, triggering all 5 of Glug's tails to wag madly. "Later, Glug, later," smiled Nelly, guessing that he was a big fan of alligator chunks. "Come on, let's go and play in the garden."
"Glug loves chasing big sticks,"
squawked Pumice, squeezing the tip of her tentacles into 2 chublocks and throwing open the back door.
"You'll find plenty of big sticks in the shed, Nelly. Help yourself."
Nelly gave Glug a pat on the head and followed Pumice and Scroot back down the hallway in the direction of the purple bucket. "Mind the wallpaper paste," said Nelly as the Grerks approached the front door.
"Oh, that will be set solid by now,"
squawked Pumice. Nelly peered into the bucket. Sure enough, the pea-green slop had totally transformed itself into a transparent lump of diamond-hard resin. "Awesome," thought Nelly. "I must pour some on Nasty's cornflakes."
"We'll be back by 8 o'clock, Nelly,"
squawked Pumice and Scroot, slipping out of the front door in a flurry of goodbye tentacles.
"Don't forget alligator chunks at 7.
"I won't forget, I promise," said Nelly with a wave. She watched the Grerks stomp down the front garden path and then closed the front door behind them. Oh, what on earth am I going to do now? She murmured. How am I going to entertain agog for 2 hours? She turned back in the direction of the hallway to find Glug jumping up and down in eager anticipation, his toenails clattering against the floorboards like dominoes being shuffled. "Okay, Glug," smiled Nelly. "Where are those big sticks?" Chapter 4. The Grerks' back garden looked much the same as Nelly's, except for the craters where Glug had been digging. In odd parts, the lawn looked more like a bomb site, but in other places, strange and exotic flowers flourished in abundance. Nelly skipped down the garden past some 6-headed dandelions and rattled the door of the Grerks' wooden shed. Entry was gained by the lifting of a simple latch. Nelly craned her neck cautiously inside, just in case there were any surprises lurking behind the door. There was. The sticks weren't sticks at all. They were branches, tree trunks even, huge great things flown in by a Scandinavian monster company called Gog Toys Direct. Each branch was stacked neatly in one corner of the shed. Nelly took a deep breath and wrapped her arms around the middle of a branch that had been stacked neatly in one corner of the shed. With a grunt and a gasp, she tugged it in the direction of the 5 tails that were wagging uncontrollably behind her. The stick weighed a ton and felt like a telegraph pole pressing against her shoulder as she hoiked it free. Nelly's cheeks puffed full and fat, and her face turned whizzle-eye red as slowly and unsteadily she inched the branch towards the lawn. Glug's eyes bulged with anticipation, and his 6 scaly legs began to yo-yo on the spot. Nelly came out of the shed backwards, finding it easier to tug than to push. With a weightlifter's wince, she composed herself for a moment, and then inched the flats of her hand as far up the branch as she could reach. Glug bounded up the lawn with his orange tongues flapping, made an ungainly handbrake turn by the patio doors, and waited excitedly for Nelly to throw the stick to him. Nelly blinked apologetically in Glug's direction and heaved the branch like a dead weight onto the ground. "Fetch!" she gasped. For a moment, Glug seemed confused. This was a variation of a familiar game that he hadn't played before. He cocked his head to one side, yo-yoed up and down 2 or 3 times, and then, with a wolfish, snarling growl, hurtled back down the garden in the direction of the stick. Nelly jumped back in alarm as Glug's jaws clamped down ferociously onto the branch and his head began to shake. His jaws shook with such force his 2 orange tongues actually blurred into one. In a slobbering, slavering frenzy of snarls, he reduced the branch to sawdust. Nelly stood motionless in the garden for a moment, trying to banish thoughts of what jaws like that could do to her legs should Glug become prematurely peckish. With a twist of her wrist, she peered down at her watch. It was 6:45. Alligator chunks in 15 minutes, she smiled. Good gog, Glug. Clever gog, Glug, she said, stepping forward confidently and rewarding him with a pat on the head. Glug padded playfully through the sawdust and cocked his head in the direction of the shed. He understood the game now and wanted to play some more. Nelly knelt down beside him and draped her arms wearily around his neck. "Oh, sorry, Glug, I'm beat. Let's play something else." Glug began to circle Nelly's feet as Nelly racked her brains for something to do. "I know," she thought. "We'll do commands. If he's a show dog, he's bound to be good at commands." Nelly straightened her back, arched her eyebrows, and pointed sharply at the ground with her newly elected command finger. "Sit," she ordered. "Sit, Glug, I say." Glug double-licked her command finger and began bouncing around on all 6s. Nelly withdrew her finger sharply and stuck it under her armpit to remove the slobber. "Roll over," she said, electing to use a full 5-fingered command hand this time. Glug's orange tongues flicked out to greet her, but this time Nelly was quick to keep her hand above slobber height. She raised her hand above Glug's head and repeated the command with a sequence of barreling, turning wrist motions. Glug watched with interest and then sprang up in an attempt to reward Nelly with another lick. Nelly sprang back. This wasn't working at all. She scratched her head. If sit didn't work and roll over didn't work, then she was pretty sure she'd be wasting her time with beg. And they were the only doggy commands that she knew. She looked around the garden and then stared at the shed. There were no balls to throw. Maybe she should try another stick. On the other hand, maybe she shouldn't. The very thought of lugging another branch out of the shed made her go weak at the knees. She looked at Glug and scratched her head again. She pondered. Scruton Pumice had said Glug was a golden revolver, so that must mean one of two things. Either he fires bullets like a revolver. Nelly scanned the garden fence and neighbouring windows for bullet holes. Or, she decided to chance it, revolve, she said, circling the air with her command finger. To her amazement, Glug's response was immediate. He sat down instantly at Nelly's feet and stared back up at her with blazing green show-gog eyes. With his tongues dangling and Nelly's command still ringing in his ears, he revolved his head full circle in one direction and then 360 degrees in the other. Nelly gulped. She really hadn't been expecting that. "Oh, good gog!" she gasped, dropping to her knees again and offering up both her cheeks for a double lick. "You are a clever boy, aren't you?" Glug wagged his tails wildly enthusiastically and treated Nelly to a few more courtesy revolutions. "Now for your reward," laughed Nelly, pointing her command finger at the kitchen. "Come on, Glug, alligator chunks." Glug howled like a wolf, sprang to his feet and began chasing all 5 tails at once. He must really like alligator chunks, thought Nelly, hurrying up the garden with Glug nipping playfully at her heels. When she arrived in the kitchen, she found Glug had bounded ahead and was already sitting by his bowl, staring unblinkingly up at the counter. Nelly picked up the can opener and attached it to the lip of the can. With every twist of the handle, Glug's head swiveled like a lighthouse. "He definitely likes alligator chunks," smiled Nelly, springing back from the dangle of slobber that was hanging from his chin. With a curious frown, she removed the lid from the can and gave it a sniff. It smelt like cheesy feet mixed with bad eggs. She read the label, "Prime chunks of alligator from the smelliest swamps of Florida, squashed into a rank rattlesnake jelly, make good gog alligator chunks the choice of champions. Best before September 8th, 3004. Nelly held her nose, bent down, and picked up Glug's bowl. Holding her breath momentarily, she placed the bowl on the kitchen counter and turned the can upside down. The contents belched into the bowl like an avalanche of frog spawn. Nelly grimaced, placed the bowl on the floor, and jumped back. Bow bobbing, tails wagging, he gobbled each meaty chunk into slobbery oblivion. Before Nelly could even say can opener, the bowl was empty, and Glug was pushing it around the kitchen floor in 2 directions with his tongues. Nelly jumped up onto the kitchen counter for safety, just in case he fancied her ankles as dessert. After 5 saliva-filled minutes, both of Glug's tongues finally gave up. With a double lick of his chops and a multi-wag of his tails, he trotted outside into the garden. Nelly jumped down, retrieved the bowl, and watched from the kitchen window as he scuttled down the lawn and began sniffing round the trunk of an extremely large oak tree. He circled the tree 3 times and then cocked 3 legs at once. Not 1 leg, not 2 legs, but 3 legs at once, without losing his balance. Nelly watched in amazement and then began to feel a little embarrassed. After all, Glug was about to have a very private moment, and here she was, gawping at him from the kitchen window. She looked away, but her curiosity immediately got the better of her. How many sprinkles was it going to be? 1, 2, or 3? Her eyes pinged back to the base of the oak tree, but before she could discover the answer, the sound of the front doorbell pinged her head in the opposite direction. Nelly looked towards the hallway. Perhaps the Grerks had come home early? Although she doubted it, she had no choice but to leave Glug to his sprinkles and answer the door. Wiping her hands on her sweatshirt, she hurried back through the lounge and into the hallway. When she opened the front door, she found not a Grerk, but a rather frail-looking woman in a grey tweed skirt and white blouse, smiling at her. She was standing on the top step and had a wicker basket hooked over her left arm and a small yellow and black striped envelope in her right hand.
Hello, said the woman. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm collecting on behalf of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Wasps. I posted an envelope through your letterbox earlier in the week.
Nelly looked down at the envelope that the woman was waving in front of her nose. I don't actually live here, explained Nelly. I'm just monster sitting for a couple of hours. The charity worker's face pinched with disappointment. Nelly looked into the woman's basket at the one and only sealed envelope that she'd managed to collect so far. Wait a moment, said Nelly, her face illuminating. I think I know exactly where the Grerks have left their envelope. I'm sure I saw it on the mantelpiece in the lounge. The charity worker's face brightened. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I'll go and get it, said Nelly. Nelly left the charity worker on the doorstep for a moment. She threaded her way down the hallway, past the purple bucket, past the pasting table and the hairy wallpaper rolls, and into the lounge. Grerks must love wasps, she thought to herself, taking the RSPCW envelope from the shelf and feeling the weight of all the coins inside. I found it, she called out to the charity worker, clonking her way back across the floorboards, past the silver dust sheets, spotty paint tins and slimy fabric books. It was on the mantelpiece in the lounge. Nelly stopped dead in her tracks. The charity worker was nowhere to be seen. Oh, where did she go? Puzzled Nelly, swivelling her head in all directions and doing a passable impression of a golden revolver. The answer came from ankle height. A soft whimpering groan drew Nelly's eyes downwards to the garden path. The charity worker was lying there, flat out on her back, and her wicker basket was hanging from a rose bush. Nelly stared down at her and then gasped. Plastered across the woman's white cotton blouse were the 6 muddy footprints of a rather large gog. Glug had escaped through the open front door. It went that away, groaned the charity worker with a groggy glance down the path. Nelly leapt from the step, hurdled the woman's outstretched body, and raced to the end of the path. Her head flashed left and right in both directions, but Glug was nowhere to be seen. With a sick, uneasy feeling, Nelly trudged back up the path to the house and helped the charity worker to her feet. He was only playing, explained Nelly. He's a cutie pie, really. The charity worker dropped her wicker basket into the nearest litter bin and staggered in the direction of home. Oh, what have I done? Gasped Nelly, sitting crestfallen on the front step. I left the front door open. That makes it my fault. What am I going to do now? Chapter 5. Panic was the answer. Panic. Run up and down Sweet Street in all directions, waving her arms and shouting, "Glug! Glug! Glug!" at the top of her voice. Heads turned and people frowned, but there was no sign of Glug anywhere. Glug, the pedigree, best-of-breed, champion of champions golden revolver that was being entered at Grunt's the very next day, complete with new collar and bow, was gone. It was a disaster. Nelly returned to number 55 and sat miserably on the front garden wall. She looked at her watch. It was 7:20. Pumice and Scroot would be back in 40 minutes. How was she going to get Glug back in time? She needed help, but she couldn't ask her mum or dad. They'd never be able to get their heads around a gog with a revolving head, and she certainly couldn't trust Asti. Nelly walked back inside the house and pulled her mobile phone out of the front pocket of her jeans. All was not lost. She'd ring Grit and Lump, her monster friends from number 42 and number 93. There was hope yet, if a Huffleluck and a Drendylegs came to help her. Grit and Lump didn't have far to come. When they heard the trouble that Nelly was in, the doors of number 42 and number 93 crashed open simultaneously. Lump was the first to hurdle the purple bucket, and Grit came thundering up the hallway of number 55 seconds after. They found Nelly in the kitchen, anxiously twiddling the handle of the can opener. "I've looked everywhere," she sighed. Grit patted Nelly's head with his 3 furry paws.
"Don't worry, he must be somewhere, Nelly," he growled. "And if he's somewhere, we'll find him." "I've got an idea," slurped Lump with a suckery thwack. Why don't we open another couple of tins of alligator chunks? Glug could smell an alligator chunk from 10 streets away. If that doesn't attract him back, nothing will.
Nelly knew a good idea when she heard one, and this was a good idea. In fact, it was better than a good idea. It was a champion of champions idea.
Where did the Grerks keep their gog food?
Asked Grit. Nelly's command finger pointed urgently to the cupboard. Up there, she said. Grit opened the cupboard and ran a red, hairy paw along the top shelf. His solitary eye, on the end of his long stalk feeler, periscoped up into the cupboard to confirm the worst. There was no gog food on the shelf. Nelly had used up the last tin. Nelly clasped her hands to her head. Oh, I forgot, she groaned. The Grerks said they needed to buy some more gog food too. Bowl collar and gog food, that's what they've gone to buy. Now what are we going to do? Lump and Grit began opening all the cupboard doors, but nothing could be found that was remotely in the same smelly league as a tin of alligator chunks.
We'll just have to go searching for him, slurped Lump. I'll do the odd numbers. You do the even numbers, Grit. Nelly, you stay here in case Glug comes home.
Nelly paced up and down in the kitchen as her two great friends hurried down the path in search of Glug. She looked at her watch again. It was 7:30. The minutes were whizzing by. The Grerks would be home in 30 minutes with a new bow and a new collar for a gog that was nowhere to be seen. All Nelly could do was wait and hope. She stared down the garden from the kitchen window. She thought about the sticks and the games they'd played together. She longed wistfully for the sight of those two orange tongues and would have given anything to be covered from head to toe with Glug slobber. He'll never come home, she sighed, removing the gog bowl from the sink and drying it with a towel. He's had his dinner. Why should he come home? Nelly didn't know why, but her prayers were miraculously answered almost the moment she placed the bowl on the drainer. With the clatter of the purple bucket and a wild scurry of claws, the pasting table in the hallway suddenly collapsed. The rolls of furry wallpaper scattered in all directions, and a 6-legged monster suddenly skedaddled into the kitchen, scooted past Nelly's legs, and hid in the cupboard under the sink. Glug was back! Nelly hardly had time to catch her breath before the bucket and the pasting table clattered again under the big hairy paws and suckery-thwockery tentacles of Grit and Lump. "Ah, he's back!" cried Nelly in delight. "Glug's come home!"
We know, gasped Grit. We saw him jumping over the fences heading for home. Where's he gone? Squeaked Lump with a breathless thwack, thwack, thwack. Nelly crouched down by the cupboard under the sink and made calm, reassuring noises in Glug's direction. Glug cowered out of sight with all 5 tails between his legs. "Oh, look, he's hurt his nose," Nelly said, peering tenderly into the cupboard. Grit and Lump stooped low to inspect the damage. "Oh, it's only a scratch," growled Grit. "It's not even a scratch," thwacked Lump. "Who did that to your nose, Glug?" said Nelly gently. "It's all right. You can come out now. You're home where you belong, and Mummy and Daddy will soon be home too, with a nice new bow and collar for you to wear to tomorrow's show." "I'll shut the front door in case he tries to run off again," growled Grit. "I'll tidy up the hallway," thwacked Lump. "Good idea," said Nelly. Lump and Grit left Nelly to coax Glug out of the cupboard. When they returned to the kitchen, they found Nelly with her head in her hands. Glug was sitting on the furry carpet tiles, scratching his hindquarters with both back legs at once. Although Glug showed no signs of going anywhere, his coat was on the move. It was teeming. It was wriggling. It was completely alive with fleas. "Oh dear," growled Grit. "He's been sniffing around the mingrel at number 252. "What's a mingrel?" asked Nelly. "It's like a mongrel, only more minging," explained Lump. "A lot more minging, actually." Nelly gulped. She'd never seen fleas like them. They were as big as Maltesers, as spiky as hedgehogs, as bouncy as super balls, and there were hundreds of them. "We've only got 12 minutes to get rid of them," cried Nelly, staring goggle-eyed at her watch. "Run the bath! Fetch the soap!"
roared Grit, picking Glug up in his red furry arms and carrying him up the stairs to the bathroom.
If there's one thing gogfleas hate, Nelly, it's soap.
Nelly and Lump followed Grit hurriedly up the stairs. There was no time to lose. Nelly emptied a gallon drum of bubble bath into the biggest bath she'd ever seen, while Lump turned on the taps and rammed in the plug. Grit waited for the water to rise, then winced as Glug planted an affectionate tongue on both of his red, hairy cheeks. "He likes you," chuckled Nelly.
No time for that sort of nonsense,
growled Grit, lowering Glug into the glistening cauldron of suds. The result was extraordinary. Everyone ducked as the gogfleas exploded like gunpowder from Glug's shaggy coat and clung fast to the ceiling and walls of the bathroom. "It's worked, Grit, it's worked, Lump!" "The moment they feel the soap, they jump," cheered Nelly. Grit smiled and heaved Glug from the bath, completely free of fleas. "Look out!" cried Nelly, shielding her eyes. "They're jumping back!" It was true. The very instant that Glug was lifted from the bath, the gogfleas leapt back onto his coat.
Put him back in,
thwacked Lump. Grit duly obliged, and once again the gogfleas exploded from his coat. "Take him back out!" cried Nelly. Grit lifted Glug from the bathwater, only to see him immediately colonised again by the fleas. "Put him back in!
take him back out,
Put him back in!
take him back out."
It was hopeless. Inside the tub all was well, but outside of the bath, away from the soap suds, Glug was an unstoppable flea magnet.
Carry him out into the garden,
thwacked Lump.
"We can hold him down with soapy water outside."
Grit tumbled down the stairs with flea-ridden Glug in his paws, Nelly and Lump racing behind them. Grit placed Glug in the middle of the lawn, while Lump used all 4 tentacles at once to shampoo, lather, hose and rinse Glug's coat. Once again the gogfleas exploded from Glug's coat, this time gaining refuge in the surrounding trees and shrubs. But just as before, they imploded back onto his coat the moment Glug had shaken himself down. Grit shook his head and growled. Lump closed all 4 eyes and suckery thwacked. Nelly leapt into the air and whooped. "Quick, quick, quick!" she cried. "I've got an idea! Bring Glug into the lounge. We're going to do some decorating." Grit and Lump didn't ask questions. There was far too little time for questions. Nelly ran through the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of washing-up liquid on the way. "We need a bucket. The purple one's no use. Try and find a bucket. The bigger the better." Grit handed Glug to Lump, ran outside into the back garden, and came back with a wheelie bin under one of his arms. "Perfect," said Nelly, pushing the silver-foiled furniture into the middle of the room. She looked at her watch. The Grerks would be home in 6.5 minutes. "OK," said Nelly. "We need to mix lots of wallpaper paste and fast." Lump took charge, handing Glug back to Grit and ripping 6 packets of paste open with one tentacle, pouring them into the wheelie bin with another tentacle, and adding water and stirring the mixture into a green slimy slop with his 2 other tentacles. "You can never have too many tentacles," thought Nelly, handing out 5 large paste brushes and 4 paint rollers. "I want the ceiling and walls pasted from top to bottom. Quick as quick, quick, quick," she pleaded. Grit handed Glug to Lump. Lump handed Glug back to Grit. Grit turned to Nelly and decided it was high time he put Glug back down on the floor. All 9 hands set to work. 4 minutes, warned Nelly as a blur of tentacles and fairy paws whizzed green sloppy goo across the walls and above her head.
"You've missed a bit,"
thwacked Lump, throwing a 4-eyed perfectionist glance at Grit. "Never mind that," shouted Nelly, raising the bottle of washing-up liquid and aiming it directly at Glug. She squeezed hard and then jumped back as the longer-lasting lemon-fresh formula spurted all over his coat. Once again the gogfleas exploded from Glug's coat and clung to the ceiling and walls. Only this time, that's precisely where they stayed, welded into place by the quick-drying monster paste. "We're not finished yet," shouted Nelly, handing out the lemon and black spotty paint tins. "Ceiling and walls, please, in double-quick time." Grit and Lump duly obliged, slapping and sploshing lemon and black spots in all directions fast. Grit was particularly careful not to miss a bit this time. He couldn't help feeling a little stung by the earlier criticism, but consoled himself with the fact that Lump's 4-tentacle advantage over his 3 paws made it perfectly reasonable to miss a bit anyway. In fact, a lesser Huffleluck would probably have missed lots of bits. While Lump and Grit set to with the paint rollers, Nelly set to with a hairdryer, drying and buffing Glug's coat back to a showgog standard of presentation. She still didn't know why Glug had run home, but she was so pleased that he had. She waved the hairdryer through his bow once more and leant back to admire the results. He looked perfect, a true champion of champions, apart from perhaps that little mark on his nose. But there was something she could do about that too. "Can I borrow your paints in a minute, please, Grit?" Nelly asked.
I haven't missed a bit, have I?
He growled. Nelly laughed and shook her head. "No, but I have." She peered into the tin and carefully placed the tip of her finger into the middle of an oily black circle of paint. With delicate precision, she carefully dabbed her fingertip onto the tip of Glug's nose. "Perfect! Glug, you're as good as new."
We're done,
growled Grit triumphantly.
Do you want us to wash the brushes?
"There isn't time," laughed Nelly. "I want you to run down the garden path as soon as you can and disappear before the Grerks come home." It was 1 minute to 8.
"Consider it gone, Nelly,"
said Lump with a suckery thwack. "Mind the bucket, and thanks for your help," shouted Nelly. Lump and Grit raced out of the house as fast as they had raced in, although this time taking especially good care to close the front door behind them. Nelly flopped out onto the silver foil covering the sofa and was enthusiastically joined by Glug. With a puff of her cheeks and a slump of her shoulders, Nelly gazed around at the newly decorated ceiling and walls. "Oh, I hope they like it," she said with an anxious nibble of her lip. When the Grerks came home, they didn't like it. They loved it. "I thought we'd go spiky wriggly in here," said Nelly, pointing to the curious texture of the ceiling and walls.
Oh, how original! How unusual! How creative, Nelly!
Squawked Pumice.
"We really are most impressed."
Scroot peered a little closer.
"Are all my eyes deceiving me, Nelly? Or are the yellow and black spots actually wriggling?"
"It does sort of give that effect, yes," nodded Nelly.
"And you've shampooed Glug as well? Oh, how kind!" cried Pumice. "He's all ready for tomorrow's show. You really didn't have to do that as well."
"Oh, I did. Believe me, I really did," smiled Nelly. Nelly stayed a few extra minutes at number 55 to see Glug crowned with his sparkling new silver collar and topped off with his new golden bow. 3 shakes of a squiddle's belly button later, Nelly was closing the garden gate and heading back along Sweet Street in the direction of home.
"You're an interior design genius, Nelly,"
squawked Pumice and Scroot, waving their tentacles vigorously from the door. Nelly turned and waved back. "That's me," she laughed, raising a tin of lemon and black spotty paint above her head. "Thanks for this. I'll redecorate my bedroom soon."
"You're very welcome,"
squawked the Grerks. Nelly breathed a huge sigh of relief and turned for home. "That was a close call," she sighed. Chapter 6. Whenever Nelly returned home from her crazy, heart-stopping, monster-sitting adventures, there was always a moment of readjustment. It was like stepping off a fairground waltzer and suddenly being rocked by the steadiness of the ground around her. The walls, the furniture, her family's voices, the sounds of the television, everything about number 119 was so quietly and reassuringly normal. Even after the funniest, gunkiest, loopiest, gloopiest monster-sitting adventures, Nelly was never sorry to be home. This evening, she had her favourite pizza combo to look forward to. So what would be waiting to greet Nelly when she returned? Would it be a thin crust, or would it be deep pan? It would be chaos. For no apparent reason, Asti had gone off on one. She was hysterical, out of control, stamping her feet and waving her arms as only Asti could.
"I did see it!"
she was screaming.
I did!
Nelly's mum and dad were trying to calm Asti down with a slice of Caribbean pizza with extra pineapple, but the more they waved it in front of her face, the angrier she got.
"It jumped straight over our fence, right over next door's hedge. It was huge,
Nelly left her American hot in its box for a moment and listened intently to Asti's outburst. After all, it wasn't often that her sister had something interesting to say. Asti, sensing a potential ally, shared her frustration with Nelly.
Nelly, I bet you know what it was. It's probably one of your revolting friends. It had 10 legs at least, and it must have been the size of a rhinoceros,
she exaggerated. Nelly looked at her mum. Her mum looked at her dad. Everyone looked at the Caribbean pizza slice.
I'm telling you, it was standing out there in the garden over by the rabbit hutch, shrieked Asti. It had 2 orange tongues, at least 10 tails, and its face was pressed right up close to the wire, and it had a blue ribbon on its head.
Nelly reached for her American hot pizza box and peered inside. It was deep pan.
You must know what it was, Nelly, shrieked Asti. You must.
Nelly sunk her teeth through a hot chili and shook her head slowly. Are you sure it wasn't a badger? She asked with a straight face.
A badger? Squealed Asti. Badgers don't jump fences. Badgers can't howl like a pack of wolves.
A fox, then, suggested Nelly helpfully. Asti exploded, slapping the Caribbean pizza slice out of her mum's hand, banging the box on the kitchen counter and stomping upstairs to her room. Nelly's dad opened Asti's pizza box, picked out all the bits of ham, and added them to his meat feast. Perhaps she's tired, said Nelly. Nelly's mum broke from her Asti-induced stupor and shook her head in bewilderment. How were the Grerks? Did you have a nice time, love? I had a lovely time, thanks, said Nelly thoughtfully. Later that evening, before retiring to her room to write her notes, Nelly offered to put the empty pizza boxes in the recycling bin outside. On the short trip back across the patio, she stopped to talk to a friend. Hello, beautiful, she whispered. Do you know something I don't know? Snowball took time out from a cabbage leaf, hopped across the hutch, and pressed his soft pink nose against the wire wall of his cage. You didn't by any chance meet a gog called Glug today, did you? And you didn't by any chance nip him on the nose, did you? And you're not by any chance the reason that Glug ran all the way home to me, are you, Snowball? Snowball flopped his ears to one side and stared indifferently through the wire. I owe you, Snowball, whispered Nelly. The Squurms at number 322. Chapter 1. Nelly and Asti were arguing again. Not about pop music or TV programmes or the meaning of life. This time it was something far more important. This time it was golden syrup.
I got it first, snapped Asti. I took it out of the cupboard in the first place, countered Nelly.
The golden syrup lurched backwards and forwards across the kitchen table as both sisters wrestled for control of the tin. If you don't stop arguing, I'll tip the rest of this mix down the sink and there won't be any more pancakes for anyone, threatened Nelly's mum. Nelly's dad wiped some sugar from the corner of his mouth and groaned.
Oh, but that's not fair. It's not me, it's them. I haven't even touched the golden syrup. I've just had sugar and lemon on mine.
Nelly's mum paddled her wooden spatula through the pancake mix and sighed. Honestly, Clifford, sometimes I wonder who the biggest kid in this family is.
They're bigger kids than me,
said Dad, folding his arms indignantly and watching the golden syrup tin ping-pong backwards and forwards in front of his eyes. Petronella and Astilby! Mum always called the twins by their christen names when she was cross. If one of you girls doesn't give in, both your pancakes will go stone cold and then no amount of golden syrup will make them edible. I'm not giving in, grimaced Nelly. I'm not giving in, growled Asti. The twins tightened their grips on the golden syrup tin and prepared to battle right through the afternoon and into the night. I wish there was no such thing as Pancake Day, grumbled Mum, ladling another dollop of pancake mix into the frying pan. Instead of Pancake Day, there should be Twins Go to Bed Early Day, or Mums Go Shopping and Spend However Much They Want to Day.
Can I volunteer for the next pancake, please, love? Asked Dad hopefully. I mean, the girls haven't even begun to eat their first one yet.
Mum flopped the pancake onto her husband's plate and looked despairingly at her 2 daughters.
Smelly Nelly,
lurched Asti.
nasty Asti,
lurched Nelly.
Could you fetch the jam, love? I think I'd quite like jam on this one,
chimed Dad. Nelly's mum was just about to pour the rest of the pancake mix over her family's heads, pack her bags and start a new life in Hawaii, when the phone rang. Not the phone in the hallway downstairs, but the phone in Nelly's bedroom upstairs. Although it sounded faint from the kitchen, Nelly's monster-sitting phone had a very distinctive trilling ring. And when it rang, it only ever meant one thing. Nelly was in demand. Nelly's eyes detached themselves from the golden syrup tin and craned upwards to the ceiling. How could she answer the phone in her bedroom without giving control of the golden syrup to Asti? The phone continued to ring unanswered. Asti sensed victory.
your phone is ringing, Nelly, my sweet, she cooed. And if you don't answer it pretty sharpish, one of your scummy, hideous, 10-headed monster friends won't be able to go out tonight and leave you with one of their freaky monster babies.
Nelly bit her lip, shoved the tin of golden syrup into Asti's chest, and raced out of the kitchen and up the stairs. As she burst through her bedroom door, she was greeted by the sound of her own voice. Please leave a message after the beeps, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Instead of diving for the phone, Nelly's curiosity got the better of her. She sat down at her homework table with her fingers poised over the phone and waited for the beep to beep. The beep of the answer phone was followed by a gurgle, and then a low googling glug. Nelly listened intently as the monster on the end of the line began to leave its message.
Hello, Nelly? We're the Squurms from number 322. We haven't met before, but we've heard a lot of wonderful things about you from Mump and Leach at number 93. We were wondering if you might be able to monster sit for us this eve.
Nelly picked up the phone. Hello, she smiled. 2 loud gurgles were followed by a glug and then a ning.
Is that Nelly, the monster sitter?
That's me, said Nelly. Of course I'll monster sit for you this evening. What time would you like me to come round? The gurgles googled and glurgled softly at the end of the phone and then returned full volume with the answer.
Could you come at 6:30 and perhaps stay until 9?
Nelly glanced at her secret drawer and smiled. I'll have to check with my mum and dad, but if you don't hear from me, I'll be there right on time. Do I need to bring anything special?
Lots of energy,
gurgled the Squurm.
Our son, Gloogle, gets bored rather easily.
Is that your son's name, Gloogle? Asked Nelly.
Pardon, Glug?
Said the Squirm. You said, our son, Gloogle. Is Gloogle your son's name?
Our son's name is Slop Gloogle,
glugged the Squirm. Slop Gloogle or just Slop? Asked Nelly, who was beginning to wish she hadn't asked.
Just Slop, Glug,
gargled the Squirm, a little confused. Oh, I see. Slop Gurgle, not Slop Gloogle, said Nelly, trying not to giggle.
No, just Slop. Our son's name is Slop. No gurgles or gloogles, just Slop,
gluggled the Squirm. And my name's just Nelly, laughed Nelly. I'll see you this evening at 6:30. Nelly put the phone down and opened the red fluffy diary on her desk. She removed a strawberry gel pen from her pencil case and carefully added 6:30 Squurms at number 322 to her monster-sitting diary. She closed the clasp, placed the pen back in its case, and swiveled round in her chair. She was just about to lean forward in the direction of her secret drawer when she suddenly sat bolt upright in her chair. Pancakes! She gasped. Asti was in control of the pancakes. There was no time to lose. A new entry in her secret monster-sitting notebook would have to wait. The wheels on the bottom of Nelly's office chair spun like a pookal's eyeballs as she launched herself out of her bedroom, down the stairs and into the kitchen. When she arrived back at the table, she found to her dismay that pancake day was most definitely over. Her mum was washing up the frying pan, her dad was refilling the sugar bowl, and Asti was licking the golden syrup spoon. It's all gone, Asti said with a triumphant lick of the spoon. Gone! 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 she said, with 3 more hugely exaggerated licks. Nelly's toes curled up inside her shoes. They had a habit of doing that when she was angry. "Oh, you greedy pig!" she snapped at her sister. "That tin was half full." "Now it's 2 halves empty," smiled Asti. Nelly looked at her plate. There was plenty of pattern, but a distinct lack of pancake. "I ate it before it got cold," smirked Asti. "Mum said I could." "Oh, Mum!" protested Nelly, placing her hands on her hips and staring daggers at the back of her mum's apron. "Don't you owe Mum me," said her mum, plunging the mixing bowl into the soapsuds. "What with golden syrup wars and fetch me the jam, I've had pancakes up to here." "Me too," smiled Asti, pointing to her tummy. "Actually, I've had pancakes up to here," she said, moving her hand 5 centimetres further up her jumper. Nelly turned to her dad, but at the mention of jam, he'd started limping again. Nelly's toes wouldn't curl any further, and so with as much self-control as she could muster, she marched out of the kitchen and straight up to the hallway mirror.
"Where are you off to this time?"
called her dad, responding to the squeaks of marker pen on post-it pad. "The Squurms at number 322, said Nelly, imagining the mirror was Asti's face and slapping the Squurms' telephone number onto it hard. "They want me there at 6:30. "Have you got any homework to do?" called her mum. "I haven't, but Asti has," shouted Nelly, beginning to exact some sweet revenge. "Don't you owe Mum me," said Nelly's mum, pointing Asti up the stairs in the direction of her own homework table. "Now go and do your homework." "I hate maths," said Asti, stomping out of the kitchen. "It's bad enough having to do it at school, let alone at home." "Pretend it's golden syrup," said her mum. "Now go and get stuck in." As Asti trudged to the bottom of the stairs, Nelly bounced into her bedroom and closed the door. Her mind was in monster mode now. "I wonder what Squurms look like. I bet they're hairy. No, they sound slimy. Maybe they're scaly. Where's my purple gel pen? Where's my monster notebook? Has Mum ironed my sardine sweatshirt?" "Monster lover!" said Asti, reaching for the handle of Nelly's bedroom door. Nelly turned the key in the lock. "Click," was her only reply. Chapter 2. Nelly emerged from her bedroom at 6:15, hair tied back, green jeans, red trainers, sardine sweatshirt. She glanced in the direction of her sister's bedroom and smiled at the sight of Asti sucking a pencil so hard that her eyebrows had joined in the middle. "The answer is 2, said Nelly. 1 + 1 = 2. Asti removed the pencil and stuck out her tongue. Nelly smiled. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she found her mum and dad crouching on their knees and running their hands over the hallway carpet. "Mind your feet," said her mum. "Your dad's lost his contact lenses." "They're in the bathroom in their pot," said Nelly. "I saw them there 10 minutes ago when I was washing my face." Nelly's mum stood up with a sigh, while Nelly's dad stayed low and looked sheepish.
"I could have sworn I had them in," he said. "I thought they'd both fallen out when I sneezed."
"We're both going to fall out in a minute if you're not careful," growled Nelly's mum. Nelly laughed and opened the front door. She felt sorry for her dad sometimes. He always seemed to be 1 step away from a limp. "I'll be back just after 9, she said. "Have fun," said her mum.
"I'm going back to glasses,"
muttered her dad. Nelly closed the front door and trotted cheerfully to the end of the garden path. There was a springtime springiness in her step, given extra bounce by the excitement of meeting some new monsters. She closed the garden gate behind her and turned in the direction of the high, even house numbers. Number 322 was going to be some way up Sweet Street to her left, and she would need to cross the road to reach it. She had decided to stay this side of the road for most of the way and cross further up, but when she saw Natalie Dupre approaching in the distance, she decided to cross early. Natalie Dupre was Asti's best friend, and as far as Nelly was concerned, that made her someone to be avoided. Nelly stopped at the curb and pretended not to notice Natalie approaching, but wouldn't you just know it, the very moment Nelly needed to cross Sweet Street, the traffic became so busy in both directions that she became hopelessly rooted to the curb. Nelly tried hard to glance sideways without moving her head. Natalie was a matter of meters away now and would open her frisbee-sized mouth any moment. Nelly considered throwing herself under a bus, but decided that was a bit drastic. "Hello, Nell Smell," said Natalie. "Where are you off to?" Nelly's head turned with painful reluctance in the direction of Natalie's snake-lipped smile. "Out," said Nelly. "You're not going to babysit one of those freaky-deaky monster thingies, are you? Asti says they've got 20 heads and huge fangs and no legs, and they slime and gunge everywhere and all over the place. And they eat people or chop you up into pieces with their razor-sharp claws. I hope you've done karate. I wouldn't go anywhere near something like that unless I knew karate. Asti says sometimes if they're not hungry, instead of eating all of you, they put giant straws in your ears and just suck your brains out instead." "Asti should know," said Nelly. "What do you mean?" asked Natalie, her eyes darkening with concern. Nelly put on her most solemn face. "The first time I went monster sitting, I took Asti with me. The monsters got a bit peckish, and Asti got grabbed. I managed to hide under the table, but Asti wasn't so lucky. I actually had to watch as they sucked her brains right out." Natalie clasped her hands over her mouth in horror. "Really?" she gasped. "That's why she can't do maths," said Nelly, trying to keep a straight face. "She's got no brain." Natalie Dupre stood silently beside Nelly and then stared up the road at number 119. "What colour was the straw?" said Natalie. "Green and white stripy," said Nelly. "She's in her bedroom trying to do her homework now. Maybe you could help her. Don't say that I told you about the brain removal, will you, because she doesn't want anyone to know." Natalie clasped Nelly's hands in hers and gave them a reassuring squeeze. "It'll be our secret, Nelly," she whispered. "I promise I won't say a word." "I must go," said Nelly, "or I'm going to be late." "Me too," said Natalie, hurrying on to offer Asti a lend of her brain. Nelly waited for a lull in the traffic and then dashed across the road. She kept the momentum of the run going a full 100 metres further up Sweet Street, only slowing as she approached the low 300s. 312, 314, 316, no purple doors yet. 318, 320, 322. No purple door at all. In fact, the front door of number 322 Sweet Street was plain ordinary white. If Nelly hadn't had a good reason to take a special interest in it, she would have passed it by without even a glance. Nelly looked around the front garden for clues of monster inhabitants. The privet hedge was neatly clipped. The lawn was nicely kept. There were no two-headed garden gnomes in the borders and no giant milk bottles on the doorstep. When she pushed the front gate open, it creaked like an ordinary gate, and when she walked down the garden path, it felt like an ordinary garden path beneath her feet. "I do hope I haven't got the wrong house," she thought to herself. "I'm sure they said 322. Nelly glanced at her watch. It was 6:30 on the dot. "Oh, well, fingers crossed," she sighed, smoothing her sweatshirt and reaching up to press the doorbell. As she pressed the clear plastic button, her fingertip sank down into it, like a hippo in a swamp. The release of the button was followed by a loud squelch and then topped with the extraordinary sound of a toilet flushing. Nelly smiled with relief. This must be the right house. Chapter 3. She was still smiling broadly when the front door flew open. Nelly's eyes widened as two monsters oozed into view.
"Hello," gurgled the Squurm to her right. "My name's Dollop, and this is my wife Splat. You must be Nelly."
"That's me," said Nelly, holding out her hand, but then withdrawing it quickly out of politeness. As far as she could see, the Squurms didn't have any hands to shake. They were like slugs, giant orange upright slugs, with moist, glistening bodies and wet, foaming mouths. All over their heads, soft yellow eyes nestled like egg yolks, and from their cheeks, stiff black whiskers bristled like burnt sparklers. They seemed very pleased to see Nelly.
"Oh, give us a squonk, Nelly the monster sitter," gurgled Splat.
Nelly braced herself as two spaghetti-like feelers suddenly sprang from the Squurm's chest and planted themselves on Nelly's nose. Nelly's face tingled with cold as two more feelers sprung forward from Dollop's shoulders and fastened themselves to her cheeks. She'd never been kissed Squirm style before. It was like having your face pressed into a bowl full of cold jelly. Splat and Dollop finished with the yucky, kissy, squonky stuff and then began gurgling to one another with excitement. Nelly wiped her face discreetly with the back of her hand and smiled. "Aren't you going to introduce me to Slop?" she laughed.
Of course we are,
replied Dollop, sprouting another spaghetti-like feeler and using it to beckon Nelly inside the house.
Please, come through.
Nelly stepped into the hallway. The doormat was squelchy too. So was the hallway floor. Not sticky squelchy, more bouncy squelchy, like the flooring you get around a climbing frame in a park. Nelly bounced along the hallway behind the Squurms and then glanced over her shoulder. You've forgotten to close the front door," she said, pointing back to the front door.
I'll get it,
gurgled Dollop, sprouting a 4-metre-long feeler and sending it through the air past Nelly's nose and in the direction of the open door. The front door slammed with a squelch. "Oh, goodness," thought Nelly, following Splat and Dollop into the lounge. "Exactly how many feelers does a Squurm have?" The answer was going up all the time, for there in the middle of the floor, sitting on a white rubber carpet, was Slop. Orange, damp and glistening, Slop was juggling 9 red bananas with 6 feelers, 7 pink apples with 5 feelers, and spinning an aluminium fruit bowl with another feeler. He was only about 1 metre tall, but what he lacked in height he more than made up for in circus tricks. "That's a lot of feelers," thought Nelly, losing count after 14. "And that is one clever little monster."
Slop, this is Nelly, the monster sitter,
gurgled Dollop.
"Nelly has come to play with you."
A shower of monster fruit clattered onto the mat as Slop withdrew the tentacles back inside his body and began bouncing up and down like a space hopper.
"Oh, good! Oh, good!"
gurgled Slop, squirming excitedly into a froth of orange bubbles. "Pleased to meet you, Slop," smiled Nelly.
"Come and sit next to us, Nelly,"
gurgled Splat, patting a large green plastic sofa with her feeler. Nelly lowered her bottom onto the sofa and then toppled over as her bottom slid in 3 directions at once. "Is it full of water?" laughed Nelly, trying to settle on the sofa without bouncing too much. Dollop laughed.
"No, kipple blubber. It's very comfortable, isn't it, Nelly?"
"Well, once your bottom eventually stops wobbling," chuckled Nelly. Dollop and Splat oozed a little closer and wrapped 6 affectionate tentacles around her shoulders.
"Now then, Nelly the monster sitter, tell us all about yourself."
"Well," said Nelly, not sure there was much to tell, "I live at number 119 with my mum and dad and my sister."
"And do they have 1 head each like you?"
asked Dollop politely. Nelly thought about Asti for a moment and then nodded.
"And how long have you been monster sitting?"
gurgled Splat. "About 6 months," smiled Nelly. "I love monster sitting. It's brilliant fun."
"I can see why you would enjoy meeting normal monsters like us," googled Dollop. "But don't you find monsters with lots of heads a bit frightening?"
"Well, 2 heads are better than 1, my mum always says," smiled Nelly.
"I'm sure you wouldn't say that if you met a Pluke,"
gurgled Splat.
"All those pink scales and those green and yellow spikes." "And their purple ears,"
added Dollop with a shudder.
"Plukes give me the wibbles, I can tell you."
"Never judge a Pluke by its cover, I say," laughed Nelly.
"You're a brave one, Nelly the monster sitter. I can see our little Slop will be in safe suckers."
"Hands," said Nelly, holding up 10 fingers. "Humans say safe hands."
"Squirms say safe suckers, but tonight it will be safe hands,"
gurgled Splat, waving 2 feelers playfully in front of Dollop's nose. Nelly glanced down at her feet. Slop had slithered across the floor towards her and was playing with the laces of her trainers. "How old is Slop?" whispered Nelly.
"He's 5 and a bite,"
googled Splat. "Don't you mean 5 and a bit?" asked Nelly.
No, his teeth have come through now. He's 5 in a bite. Show Nelly your teeth, Slop.
Slop tilted 6 yolky yellow eyes up at Nelly and parted his thin black inner tube-like lips into a smile. 2 rows of lime-green barracuda-style teeth presented themselves to Nelly.
He may only be 5 in a bite, continued Splat, but he's very advanced for his age. He can already count from 1,000,000,000,000 to 1 backwards, and he can do his 83 times table just like...
Nelly leant back as Splat clicked another feeler in front of her nose.
That!
Nelly smiled at Slop and then leant forward to examine her shoelaces. Slop had tied both of them together.
Ha! So you're a practical joker, are you, Slop? Laughed Nelly. I'm not falling for that one.
Slop's eyes glowed orange for a moment and then faded back to yellow.
Yeah, the trouble is, Nelly, gurgled Dollop, because he's so bright, Slop gets so bored so easily. Do you think you'll be able to keep him amused while we're away?
Entertainment is my middle name, smiled Nelly, retying her laces and then sliding off the sofa with a squelch.
We'll be fine, won't we, Slop?
What are we going to play, Nelly?
Gurgled Slop, his orange body rippling like a caterpillar.
There are plenty of games in the cupboard under the window, gurgled Dollop.
Nelly sat cross-legged on the floor in front of Slop. She gave him a playful nudge with her elbow and peered deeply into 3 of his yolky eyes.
It's far too nice an evening to play indoors, laughed Nelly. I think we should go out into the garden, don't you, Slop? Maybe we can make up some games of our own.
Slop began to froth with excitement and pointed all 6 eyes in the direction of the garden. Splat stood up with a blubbery squish.
Dollop and I thought we'd go to the cinema, Nelly, she gurgled. We've never been to see a movie in a cinema before. I'm just going upstairs to put on my makeup and then we'll be ready to leave.
Nelly adjusted her scrunchie and smiled. We'll be outside if you need us, she said. Come on, Slop, show me where the garden is. It's time to have some fun. Before Nelly could blink, a long, sinuous feeler sprouted from Slop's forehead and attached itself like a limpet to her chin.
This way, Nelly,
he frothed excitedly. Nelly scrambled to her feet and let her chin do the leading. Across the soft, rubbery white tiles of the lounge she ran, through a glistening curtain of silver beads, and into another room at the back of the house. Nelly could see the garden beckoning through the open French doors, but suddenly applied the brakes. The soles of her trainers squeaked as she skidded to a halt on the rubber carpet.
Whoa, Slop, whoa, she laughed. What have you got there?
Slop squelched to an impatient halt and turned round. His yellow, yolky eyes travelled down the length of Nelly's outstretched arm and came to rest on the tip of her pointing finger.
It's our fish tank,
said Slop, releasing Nelly's chin with a soft thwack. Nelly leant forward and peered wide-eyed at the biggest home aquarium she'd ever seen. It was at least 3 meters long and 1 meter deep, and it was supported by an industrial-strength stand made of scaffold poles.
That glass must be 10 centimeters thick,
gasped Nelly, tapping the front wall of the aquarium with the back of her finger. It needed to be. The moment Nelly's finger tapped the glass, a shoal of ferocious yellow creatures flew out from behind a pile of yellow house bricks, hurled themselves in her direction and began barking at the glass. Yes, barking at the glass. Nelly withdrew her finger instantly and watched in astonishment as the barking turned to growls. She'd never seen or heard fish like them. They were about the length of a fish finger, but there the similarities ended. Some had 2 heads, some had 3 tails, and there was a distinct lack of breadcrumbs. Across the tops of their backs was a crest of black needles, and along both flanks of their bodies were ridges of flapping red fins.
What kind of fish are those? Nelly gasped.
Shredders,
yawned Slop. They look hungry, said Nelly, leaning forward for a closer inspection and then stepping back as the growls erupted into barks again.
They're always hungry, sighed Slop.
What do you feed them on? Asked Nelly, taking another cautionary step away from the aquarium glass.
Piranhas,
yawned Slop.
Come on, Nelly. Fish tank.
tanks are boring. Let's go into the garden and play.
Nelly quivered slightly as another cold, damp slop sucker attached itself to her right ear and drew her gently away from the aquarium. 6 sideways steps and a tug, and Nelly was through the French doors and into the garden. "I'm telling you, Slop, if you think shredders are boring, you should try goldfish," exclaimed Nelly. "Now, goldfish really are boring." Slop sprouted 12 sticky feelers, raised them to his mouth, and yawned again.
Be careful in the sand pit, Nelly. It's very deep,
gurgled a familiar voice. Nelly looked round and stifled a giggle. Splat was standing by the French windows, sporting a kaleidoscope of yellow lipstick and green fluorescent eyeshadow.
It's glow-in-the-dark makeup, Nelly. Do you think I look good in the cinema?
I think you'll be a bigger attraction than the film, beamed Nelly. I think you look stunning. Splat's cheeks blushed blue with embarrassment. A twiddle of feelers rippled in all directions and then pointed in the direction of the lawn.
Seriously, Nelly, please, be very careful if you play in the sandpit. The sand goes all the way down.
Nelly followed Splat's feelers with her eyes and then smiled at the sight of a harmless-looking circle of sand located in the middle of the lawn. It's okay, I've played in sandpits before, laughed Nelly. Dollop joined Splat and placed 6 feelers affectionately around her waist. Or was it her neck? Or her knees? It wasn't easy to tell.
It's time we went, dear, gurgled Dollop. Oh, we'll miss the film.
What film are you going to see? Asked Nelly.
Toxic Scum Revenge Attack 3, gurgled Splat. I do so love a good romance.
Nelly scratched her head and then smiled and waved. Don't forget to have an ice cream in the interval, shouted Nelly.
I'm going to have 6,
gurgled Dollop, waving back with a flurry of feelers.
We promise we'll be back by 9.
Nelly watched the Squurms slither away and then return almost as quickly as they'd gone.
Nelly, there's one thing we forgot to tell you about playing games with Slop, gurgled Dollop.
Oh yes, what's that? Smiled Nelly.
Slop likes to win, gurgled Splat. Slop has to win, gurgled Dollop.
Ha! We'll see about that, laughed Nelly. Chapter 4. The front door closed with a squelch, and Nelly and Slop were left alone in the garden to play.
Have you ever played bat and ball, Nelly?
Gurgled Slop excitedly. Of course I have, said Nelly. I'm rather good at it, actually.
I bet I win,
gurgled Slop, bouncing straight down to the end of the lawn and wrenching open a pair of riveted steel shed doors. Nelly stood by the house and waited for Slop to emerge with a bat and ball. The ball came first. It flew like a missile out of the shed without any warning at all and landed at her feet. Nelly bent down and picked it up. It was made of clear perspex. It was as big as a football, but rather oddly, it was as light as a ping-pong ball. There was something else that was strange about it, too. It was full of winged insects, fluttering and flitting around inside. Nelly peered into the sphere for a closer look. It reminded her of a snow shaker, except instead of snow, there were creepy crawlies flying around. They were like earwigs with wings. They had heads at both ends of a slender black body, pincer jaws, and tiny silver eyes. Their wings extended in 2 directions at once from the middle of their body, allowing them to fly forward and reverse with ease. Nelly shook the ball to stir them up a little, and as she did so, the ball began to buzz. The wings of the insects inside the ball blurred like hummingbird wings, and the ball began to lift out of her hand. Wow, thought Nelly, this is one weird ball. Weird was about to get weirder. Nelly was just drawing the ball back towards her chest when an almighty rumpus kicked up in the shed. It sounded like Slop was riding bucking bronco with a gorilla. Nelly stared down the garden in amazement as Slop emerged partially from the darkness inside the shed and then catapulted back inside with a clatter. He appeared again briefly, his orange feelers stretched tight and straining to drag something from the shed. 12 feelers, 13 feelers, 14 feelers sprung from his body, lassoing something inside. Nelly covered her ears as a high-pitched scream issued from inside the shed, sending the enamel on her teeth jangling. Whatever Slop had hold of didn't want to come out. Another scream pierced Nelly's eardrums as Slop sent more tentacles into the darkness. Slop was struggling, but he was winning. Centimetre by centimetre, he was emerging from the shed, his whiskers bristling like a walrus and his feelers drawn tight as bicycle spokes.
"Oh, won't be a moment, Nelly,"
he gurgled. One explosive moment later, he was flat on his back on the lawn, buried beneath the crumpled wings of two very large and very angry bats.
"I've got him,"
gurgled Slop.
"They don't like playing games in the daylight."
Nelly stared gobsmacked at the two bats that Slop had dragged from the shed. They had ultraviolet eyes, flared dragon-like nostrils, wings the texture of black velvet curtains, and wingspans the size of microlights. Slop extracted himself from the tangle, stood up and rippled with excitement.
"Choose a bat, Nelly,"
he gurgled. With a slight intake of breath, Nelly pointed to the bat on the left. From where she was standing, it looked the slightly smaller of the two.
"Good. I'll use this one then,"
gurgled Slop, attaching a sucker to the larger bat's nostril and leading it towards the house. Nelly's courage began to falter as the bat she had nominated to use stood up, flapped the creases from its wings, and began lumbering grumpily across the lawn towards her. "Oh, I wonder where the handle on my bat is," she gulped, as Slop and the two bats joined Nelly at the top of the garden.
"Okay, Nelly, let's play,"
gurgled Slop. Hang about," said Nelly. "I haven't played this kind of bat and ball before. You need to explain the rules." Slop let go of his bat's nostril and took the perspex sphere from Nelly's hands.
"This is a ball, Nelly, and these are the bats,"
gurgled Slop. Nelly sighed. "Oh, yes, Slop, I rather gathered that." A shadow fell across her eyes as both of the bats loomed towards the ball and began salivating at the sight of the insects inside. Brown dribble fell like chocolate sauce onto the grass just centimetres from the toes of Nelly's trainers. Slop attached a sucker to the ball that Nelly had been holding and began spinning it like a basketball in front of her nose.
"What you have to do, Nelly, is throw the ball to me without my bat chomping it, and I have to throw the ball to you without your bat chomping it."
Nelly nodded slowly. That sounded simple enough.
"The bats want to eat the insects inside the ball, so if you throw it too close to their jaws, they'll munch it and crunch it. If my bat munches and crunches it on your throw, you lose. If your bat munches and crunches it on my throw, I lose. Are you ready to play, Nelly?"
gurgled Slop, placing the ball between two suckers. "I think so," said Nelly, jumping backwards as her bat unfurled its monstrously big wings.
"Oh, one other thing I forgot to tell you, Nelly,"
gurgled Slop. "What's that?" squealed Nelly as the purple claws of her bat lunged unexpectedly for her shoelaces.
"It's an upside-down game."
Nelly squealed again as the talons of her bat tightened around her laces, picked her up and swept her into the air. A flap and a swoop later, she was upside down, dangling by two laces and staring at the roof tiles of the Squurm's house.
"Catch!"
gurgled Slop. Nelly glanced round dizzily. The roof tiles whizzed away like a fairground waltzer, and she plummeted fast towards the ground.
"Catch, Nelly!"
gurgled Slop, waving the ball directly in front of her. Nelly threw out her arms as Slop released the ball from his suckers. Her brains felt as though they were about to fall out through her ears. The jaws of Nelly's bat snapped greedily as the ball swerved, first one way and then another, before propelling itself into Nelly's outstretched palms. "How did you get it to swerve?" she gasped, swooping back up and over the chimney.
"I didn't,"
gurgled Slop.
"The insects did it. They don't want to get eaten."
"I don't blame them," thought Nelly, trying to turn her eyeballs the right way up.
"Throw it to me, Nelly,"
laughed Slop, dive-bombing past the bathroom window. Nelly swooned. Her brains had topsy-turvied, and the blood in her veins was travelling south-north too. She hurled the ball as hard as she could in the direction of Slop's outstretched feelers, and then reached out unsuccessfully to try and steady herself on the drain pipe as she swooped past. The eyes of Slop's bat glowed gas-ring blue as the ball sped towards him. More chocolate sauce dribble ladled from its fangs, and its lips rippled hungrily as the ball swerved close. With a screech and swoop, Slop's bat made its move, lunging at the ball with wide-open jaws. The heat from its nostrils steamed the surface of the ball as its fangs closed in on it. But as its jaws snapped shut, Slop's feeler whip-cracked the ball away just in time.
That was close, Nelly. You'll have to throw harder than that.
Nelly had already had enough. She was suffering badly from danglyitis. In fact, she doubted whether she would ever be able to stand up straight again. Her bat still meant business, though. It swooped left towards the fence and right towards the shed where Slop was preparing to release the ball. Slop was a master. He not only released the ball at just the right speed and at just the right time, but with just the right swerve to baffle her bat into missing. Nelly wasn't a master. She was a mess. She felt so dizzy, she didn't know which way was up and which way was down. But backwards and forwards they continued to swoop. As Nelly's hands closed around the ball for the 7th time, she began to get the feeling that it wasn't the insects inside the ball that were buzzing. It was her brain cells. She felt giddy. She felt sick. She was completely dangled out. If she was going to find the energy to last until 9 o'clock, then there was nothing for it. She would need to concede defeat. With a half-hearted loop of her arm, she deliberately lobbed the ball tamely into the jaws of Slop's bat. The perspex ball shattered and the insects scattered.
I win,
gurgled Slop.
I always win.
Nelly groaned a sigh of relief as the wings of her bat stopped flapping and lowered her back down onto the lawn. She fell into a heap, rolled over and lay flat out on her back, staring up at the sky.
1-0 to me, Nelly. Do you want to play again? I've got some more balls in the shed.
Nelly shook her head and tried to focus on a cloud or a bird, anything.
I'll put the bats away then, gurgled Slop. Then we can play something else.
As Slop led the bats back to the shed, Nelly flopped out and took the opportunity to try and regain her breath. You haven't got a swing ball, have you, Slop? Panted Nelly, lifting her head weakly and peering down the garden. That's the sort of bat and ball game I like.
Oh, the children next door have, gurgled Slop. I've watched them playing it from my bedroom windows. It's a ball on a rope, isn't it?
Nelly nodded and then laughed as Slop sprouted a dozen feelers and pretended to play swing ball in front of her. Jumping from left to right and taking swipes at the air, he looked like a demented orange cheese string.
I think swing ball would be better if it had 100 balls on 100 ropes, gurgled Slop.
Uff, you win again, Slop, laughed Nelly, conceding inevitable defeat. Nelly sat up and looked up and down the garden. Playing games with a squirm was proving more challenging than she had imagined. Have you got any buckets and spades? She said, looking optimistically at the sandpit in the middle of the lawn. We can have a sandcastle building competition. Slop scratched his shins with 3 feelers.
I'm not sure it's the right sort of sand for sandcastles, he gurgled.
Don't worry, said Nelly. If it's too dry, we can add some more water from the sink in the kitchen. Nelly skipped down the garden in the direction of the sandpit. Wow, I bet you have some fun in here, Slop, she laughed. I haven't been in a sandpit for years, she cried, throwing her arms above her head and jumping in with both feet. Her legs vanished, and the bones in her waist groaned as an unbearable pressure suddenly applied itself to her lower body. She was sliding fast. She was disappearing. Her rib cage felt like it was about to crunch like a walnut in a nutcracker. Oh, it's quicksand, Slop! It's quicksand! I'm being sucked under! Help me, please! Slop jumped into the sandpit and began to paddle around playfully on his back. For a squirm, it was nothing more than a paddling pool. I'm not playing, Slop! I'm not playing! I'm sinking!
Oh, goodness!
Gurgled Slop, sprouting 30 feelers all at once. 12 slapped themselves to the top of Nelly's head, 3 fixed themselves to her cheek and nose, 2 more to her ears, and the rest to a tree over by the fence. With an incredible heave and a noise like a bog belch, Nelly was dragged from the quicksand and dumped in a heap back on dry land. She scrabbled to her feet, staggered left and right, and brushed herself down. "Oh, thank you, Slop," panted Nelly. "That wasn't the sort of sand I was expecting. How deep does it go down?"
2 kilometres is the furthest I've ever been," gurgled Slop. "Do you want me to get your socks and trainers?"
Nelly looked at her feet. Her socks and trainers had been sucked clean off. "Later," she gasped. "Slop, I hope you don't mind," said Nelly, stamping as much sand off as she could. "But I think we should play indoors."
"I don't mind where we play, Nelly," gurgled Slop, "as long as I win."
Chapter 5. Nelly's bare feet padded across the white rubber flooring, past the shredder tank and back into the lounge. "I feel all stretched like a piece of elastic," said Nelly, doing a head over heels in the direction of the games cupboard. "Who taught you to juggle?" said Nelly, picking up the red bananas and pink apples and returning them to the fruit bowl.
"I taught myself,"
gurgled Slop, cartwheeling on 4 feelers in the same direction. "Can you do this with your tongue?" said Nelly, rolling her tongue like a newspaper and wiggling it about.
"I haven't got a tongue," gurgled Slop. "Can you do this with your eyes?"
Nelly watched as Slop jolted his head forward sharply, sending all 6 of his egg yolk eyeballs dangling from their sockets. They bounced up and down in front of Nelly like globules of glue before catapulting back into place with another sharp flick. "Ho, you're good," grinned Nelly. "You're very good. But can you do this?" Slop watched intently as Nelly placed both hands behind her back, interlocked her fingers, and then passed both hands back over her head again. "I'm double-jointed," smiled Nelly. Slop grew 8 feelers, twiddled them together like twine, passed them over his head, wrapped them around his waist, and then draped them around his neck like a scarf.
"I'm no-jointed," he grinned.
"Oh, you win," laughed Nelly, somersaulting across the floor towards the games cupboard beneath the window.
"I always win," boasted Slop.
"We'll see about that," said Nelly, prizing open the 2 white plastic doors of the games cupboard. It was full of games, all of them monster strange. "How do you play this?" asked Nelly, pulling a purple and red stripy box out of the cupboard.
"Oh, you'll need 8 legs to play that one," gurgled Slop.
Nelly pushed the box back into place and yanked a long silver tube out from beneath it. Prizing open the lid with her fingers, she tipped the tube in the direction of the floor and then watched in amazement. A 6-legged dice was crawling to the lip of the tube. It jumped onto the carpet and began cartwheeling across the floor. Nelly pressed her eye to the tube and then recoiled as hundreds of multicoloured tubes slithered like snakes onto the floor and began linking together to form different 3-dimensional shapes.
"Ugh, you need 3 feet to play that one," gurgled Slop, shooing the snakes and the dice back inside the tube. "And 6 noses."
Nelly returned the tube to the cupboard. "How about this one?" asked Nelly, pulling what looked like a silver and green Ludo board out of an aluminium box. Slop oozed across the white rubber carpet and pressed his damp orange skin against Nelly's arm. Nelly's eyes followed a long spaghetti-like feeler as it emerged from Slop's forehead, wavered like a snail's horn through the air, and finally came to a sticky rest on the bottom of the aluminium lid. "Oh," said Nelly, reading the small print, "not suitable for creatures with 1 brain."
"These are all monster games," gurgled Slop. "I'm afraid, Nelly, you have to be normal to play them."
Nelly sat up indignantly. "What are you saying, Slop? 1 head, 2 arms and 2 legs sounds perfectly normal to me."
"Oh, well, not to me it doesn't," gurgled Slop.
Nelly frowned into as many of Slop's eyes as she could see at once, held her breath for as long as she could, then burst out laughing. "Haven't you got any normal games? Sorry, I mean weirdo games?" asked Nelly. Slop scratched the middle of his chest with 3 feelers and thought hard.
"Do you know what, Nelly? I believe there may be some weirdo games in the cupboard under the stairs. My mum bought a whole pile of weird stuff at a boot sale we went to last summer. I remember it was such a hot day we were asked to come off the bouncy castle. There was frost everywhere. We were in such a lather by the time we got home. Mum just threw the bags under the stairs, and that's where they stayed.
Let's take a look, said Nelly. Nelly followed Slop out of the lounge and into the hallway.
They're in here,
gurgled Slop, pointing to the base of the stairs. There's no handle on the cupboard, said Nelly, running her fingers across the door.
Squurms don't need handles,
gurgled Slop, planting a sticky feeler pad against the chromium panel and wrenching it open with a thwack. Nelly waited patiently as Slop sent 8 more feelers into the cupboard.
Here they are,
gurgled Slop, pulling 3 large carrier bags out of the darkness. Excellent, said Nelly, dropping to her knees and plunging her hands inside the first bag. Well, we can't play kettle, and we can't play saucepan, said Nelly, rummaging through the contents. Or flower pot, or toasted cheese maker, or breadboard. Let's have a look in the second bag. Slop hurled the first bag back under the stairs while Nelly reached inside the second. Twister! She cried. You've got Twister! Oh, I love Twister! You'll love Twister.
How do you play Twister?
Gurgled Slop, a little intrigued. Nelly opened the box and explained. Basically, you spread this mat out on the floor like this, and you have to stretch your arms and legs across all these different coloured circles and get in a right angle without losing your balance. If you lose your balance and fall over, the other person wins.
I win again,
gurgled Slop. Nelly watched dumbfounded as Slop sprouted more feelers than a sea anemone and placed them effortlessly on every coloured circle on the twister mat without losing his balance in the slightest.
I can take your goals too if you like, laughed Slop, doubling his feelers to 24 and then producing 1 extra feeler to tickle Nelly under the chin with.
Nelly folded the twister mat and stuck it back in its box. OK, maybe Twister isn't for us, sighed Nelly. I'll see what else is in the bag. There was a china poodle, a loo brush, a thermos flask, and a big value king-size box of soap powder. Be careful with the poo... Nelly closed her eyes and winced as Slop lobbed the china poodle back into the darkness, smashing it against the wall. Dull, sighed Nelly.
Oops,
said Slop. Nelly reached for bag number 3. Cross your fingers, said Nelly.
How many?
Gurgled Slop. As many as you've got, laughed Nelly. Aha! Whooped Nelly. You can have all the arms and legs in the world, but it won't help you beat me at Scrabble. Slop slithered up close as Nelly pulled a Scrabble box out of the bag and laid the board out on the floor. She emptied the letters into one of the carrier bags and gave them a shake.
Are these the instructions?
Gurgled Slop, passing the lid of the box in front of 3 of his eyes. Yup, said Nelly. Would you like me to read them to you?
I've just read them,
gurgled Slop, reaching into the bag with a long, sinuous feeler and drawing the letter J. Nelly placed her hand in the bag, pulled out her letter and peered at it. E. E is lower than J, so that means I go first.
OK,
gurgled Slop, unfazed by Nelly's early advantage. Nelly took her first 7 letters and arranged them on her rack. Slop plunged 7 feelers into the bag and took out his letters too. After much frowning and lip nibbling, Nelly placed her first word on the board. Farm. That's 18 points to me.
Is it my go now?
Gurgled Slop. Yes, said Nelly, placing 4 new letters on her rack.
99 points for me,
gurgled Slop, placing all 7 of his letters down on the board. Nelly placed her hands on her hips. Jaffa-coog? What kind of a word is Jaffa-coog?
It's Squirmies for thank you,
gurgled Slop, reaching into the bag for another 7 letters. Oh, said Nelly, writing down Slop's score and then frowning intensely at her letters. After 3 long minutes, her face broke into a smile. Jelly, she pronounced triumphantly. 23 points to me.
122 points to me,
gurgled Slop, placing 7 more letters down on the Scrabble board. Gonzy box? What's Gonzy box? Exclaimed Nelly.
It's where squirms keep their fish food,
gurgled Slop, adding his score to the pad. I thought you said you fed your fish piranhas.
We do,
gurgled Slop.
But we keep our piranhas in a Gonzy box,
Oh, said Nelly, sensing that her heaviest ever Scrabble defeat was approaching. Slop was as good at Scrabble as he was at bat and ball. Nelly learnt that a quail-fiddy was a small furry monster with 2 trunks that only came out at night. She discovered that a smovgrot was a kind of woodlice jam, and that a weenip watch was the hairy tuft between a huffaluk's toes.
I win, gurgled Slop. 957 points to 106.
That's because you got all the best letters, huffed Nelly.
I always win, gurgled Slop. What shall we play now?
Nelly puffed out her cheeks. She was all gamed out. She stood up with a sigh and flopped out onto the sofa. What could they play? What could they play? She looked around the room for inspiration. Nothing sprang from the white rubber wallpaper, and she drew a blank from the white plastic floor too. The clock on the wall said 7:15. Dollop and Splat wouldn't be back for almost 2 hours.
Let's play I Spy, gurgled Slop. I spy with my 6 yellow eyes.
Let's not, said Nelly. Slop placed the boot sale toys back into their bags and returned them to the cupboard under the stairs.
I know what we can do,
said Nelly, springing off the sofa and turning in the direction of the kitchen.
What?
gurgled Slop. Pancakes, said Nelly. Do you like pancakes?
Oh, how do you play pancakes?
gurgled Slop. You don't play 'em, you eat 'em, said Nelly. You got any eggs?
There's loads in the fridge,
gurgled Slop. Have you got any milk?
Next to the eggs,
gurgled Slop. Then pancakes it is, proclaimed Nelly. Chapter 6. Nelly marched into the Squurm's kitchen feeling quite pleased with herself. Despite Asti's best efforts to stop her enjoying pancakes at home, she could now enjoy some with Slop. Even better, with no Asti around, she could nosh as many pancakes as she liked. Her mum had taught her how to make them. They were really simple to do. I'll need some self-raising flour too, Slop, said Nelly, scanning the shiny chrome doors of the Squurm's kitchen wall cabinets.
I don't know what that is,
gurgled Slop.
Try in there,
he said, sprouting a feeler from his chest and spiralling it through the air in the direction of a cupboard door. Nelly ran the flats of her fingertips over the smooth surface of the cupboard door. Like the door under the stairs, there were no handles. Slop did the honours, opening the wall cabinet door with one sucker and the fridge door with another. That looks like flour, said Nelly, taking a silver packet of soft white powder off the shelf and giving it a sniff. She stuck her finger in and gave it a lick. It tasted sweeter than flour, but Nelly decided to give it a go.
Eggs,
gurgled Slop. Nelly turned round and shuddered. Slop was juggling again. Careful, Slop, you might drop them, she gasped. Slop withdrew all 15 feelers and let the eggs fall to the floor. They bounced off the floor tiles like super balls and returned to their box.
Oh, what sort of eggs are they?
gasped Nelly.
They're very eggs, of course, gurgled Slop. Haven't you seen a very egg before?
Nelly began to feel foolish for not having seen a very egg before, and then reminded herself that of course she hadn't seen a very egg before. She'd never made a pancake for a squirm before either. Let me see one, said Nelly inquisitively. Slop tossed a very egg to Nelly, who caught it in both hands and then cupped it in her palms. It felt about as heavy as an ordinary chicken egg, and if anything, looked slightly whiter. What is a very? asked Nelly suspiciously.
It's a bird, of course, gurgled Slop. It's got 3 beaks, 2 at the front of its head, 1 at the back, and 4 wings covered in leathers.
Don't you mean feathers?
No, grimps have feathers. Berries have leathers. They're kind of leathery feathers. Mum says they're ever so difficult to pluck.
Nelly nodded blankly and then took a closer look at the egg in her palms. How do you crack them open?
You don't crack them, you unscrew them,
gurgled Slop, placing 2 feelers top and bottom of an egg and twisting it in opposite directions. Nelly watched enthralled as the very eggshell parted cleanly to reveal a glistening green yolk inside, about the size of a ping-pong ball. Slop held it under her nose. It smelt just like marzipan. These were going to be pancakes with a difference. "All we need now is milk, a mixing bowl, and a frying pan," said Nelly. Slop duly obliged, producing all three at once from 3 different directions. Nelly looked at the milk. It was blue. It smelt fresh enough, but it was the colour of a school exercise book. She wasn't at all sure she wanted to know from which creature it had been milked, and so instead of asking any further questions, she simply poured. Into the mixing bowl it went, along with the yolks of 4 very eggs and the flour from the silver packet. The mixture went stiff almost instantly. "More milk!" cried Nelly. "Coming up!" gurgled Slop. "More milk again!" cried Nelly. Her arms were already beginning to ache.
"Coming up again!" gurgled Slop. "Do you want me to whisk?"
Nelly puffed out her cheeks and looked at Slop. The advantage of having 20 arms to whisk with was easy to figure. She handed Slop the bowl with a grateful sigh and carried the frying pan to the cooker. It was an electric cooker with circular cooking rings, not very different from the one her mum used at home. "Butter," said Nelly under her breath. "I need to melt a knob of—" A packet of butter was hovering before her eyes. She reached up and took it from the feeler that was dangling above her head. "Thank you, Slop," she said, prizing open the packet.
"My pleasure,"
gurgled Slop. The butter was yellow, with black zebra stripes. Nelly smiled adventurously and broke 2 large chunks into the pan. It sizzled like butter and browned like butter, but the stripes crisped like bacon before dissolving into ash. "Are you ready with the mixture, Slop?" Slop gave the mixture a quick whisk with his feelers and then passed the bowl to Nelly. "Here goes," said Nelly, pouring in the first measure of pancake mixture. Slop stood warily back as the frying pan began to sizzle. "Looking good," said Nelly, paddling the mixture gently. "Smells delicious, too." Slop's nostrils began to twitch as the kitchen filled with the aroma of almonds, peanut butter, and strawberry sauce. Nelly lifted the gleaming silver frying pan off the cooker ring and prepared to toss her first ever squirm pancake. "Now, you have to be careful when you do this, Slop, or your pancake can end up stuck to the ceiling." Slop looked up at the ceiling and then back at the frying pan. "Here goes," said Nelly, taking the frying pan handle in both hands and getting ready to flip. With a sharp upward movement, Nelly sent the pancake nowhere. It refused to budge. It wasn't stuck to the pan. In fact, it was quite the lightest, fluffiest-looking pancake that Nelly had ever seen. But flip, it wouldn't.
"Maybe it's flour, not flour,"
gurgled Slop. Nelly tried again, lowering the frying pan and then hurling it upwards with all her might. But it was no use. She had made the world's first gravity-defying pancake. "Oh, well," smiled Nelly, placing the frying pan on the side. "We'll just have to eat it like it is." Slop reached 2 plates down from a cupboard and took some knives and forks out of a drawer. Nelly slid the pancake onto a plate and cut it in half. The smell of strawberry sauce wafted stronger as the pancake divided. "Half for you, Slop, and half for me," smiled Nelly. Slop's orange lava-like body rippled from top to bottom as the first forkful of pancake disappeared inside his lips. Nelly nodded her agreement, chewing slowly and deliberately, savouring every moment. The first pancake was delicious. So was the second pancake. In fact, so was the third and the fourth. There was no need for golden syrup or sugar or jam. They were quite sweet enough as they were. But after her 6th, Nelly began to feel rather queasy. "I think I've had enough pancakes now," said Nelly with a belch.
"Me too,"
gurgled Slop with a squelch.
"What shall we play now?"
"Oh, Slop," groaned Nelly. "Aren't you worn out yet?"
"How about hide and seek?"
gurgled Slop. Nelly looked at her watch. There was plenty of time for another game. "Oh, all right, Slop," sighed Nelly. "You win. Hide and seek it is." Chapter 7.
"You hide first,"
gurgled Slop, his glistening orange body rippling with excitement. Nelly burped again and trotted queasily in the direction of the lounge.
"What shall I count to?"
gurgled Slop.
"1 million? 1 zillion? 1 trillion?"
100 will do, laughed Nelly.
Forwards or backwards? Gurgled Slop.
Any way you like, shouted Nelly, squeezing under the shredder tank and pressing herself as far back against the wall as she could go. And make sure you close your eyes, all 6 of them. Slop paused at 43.5, placed a sucker over each egg yolky eye, and then proceeded to count upwards to 100 in fractions.
Coming, ready or not?
He gurgled. Clean you, he gurgled again, sending a long, sinuous feeler into the lounge through the beaded curtain under the shredder tank and tapping Nelly on the nose. Nelly sighed and then wriggled out from her hiding place. How can you possibly see me when you're not even in the same room? She protested.
Your pulse gave you away, gurgled Slop.
I win. Nelly stood up and put her hands on her hips. You don't win. It just means it's your turn to hide and my turn to seek.
Close your eyes and count to 100 then, gurgled Slop. I'm going to hide now.
Nelly cupped her hands over her eyes and began to count. She kept her ears open for clues, but heard nothing except the sound of her own voice. 98, 99, 100. Coming, ready or not, she called. The house fell silent. Nelly turned in the direction of the curtain and slid her hands through the beads. They parted with a soft jangle as she made her way through into the lounge. Her eyes dropped to the floor beneath the green plastic curtains hanging either side of the bay window. Slop wasn't hiding there. Too obvious, she murmured, skirting around the armchairs and then dropping to her knees to see if Slop had squeezed under the tiny gap beneath the sofa. He wasn't hiding there either. She stood up and padded barefoot across the white rubber carpet tiles and prized open the door of the games cupboard. There was no sign of the little orange rascal in there either. Nelly frowned and took 10 determined strides into the kitchen. She squinted into the narrow gaps between the units and then prized open the kitchen cupboards with a fork. The shelves were lined with groceries of the grossest kind. Tins of squeak liver in bitter bean sauce, pickled jove cheeks, mungus steaks, boil-in-the-bag lumpet, and family packets of odd in batter were piled high, but there was no sign of Slop. Nelly scratched her head. She was beginning to sense that she had a challenge on her hands. Wherever Slop was hiding, you could be sure that he wasn't going to be easy to find. She opened the fridge door and lifted the flap of the freezer compartment. The space inside was already occupied, not by Slop, but by a packet of frozen Weeps. Nelly closed the fridge and turned towards the pedal bin. She placed her foot on the red chromium pedal and pressed down. The lid flapped open to reveal the leftovers from the Squurms' tea the night before. 4 fish eyes the size of cricket balls and a scattering of cactus peelings. But no Slop. Slop wasn't in the lounge and he wasn't in the kitchen. So where was he? I'm going to find you, Slop. It's the last thing I do, shouted Nelly. She paused for a moment, half hoping that Slop might acknowledge her with a gurgle and give her a clue to where he was hiding. No such luck. Maybe he sneaked upstairs, she thought. I know, I'll check the cupboard under the stairs, and if he's not in there, I'll look in the bedrooms. Nelly left the kitchen and returned to the hallway. She passed the flats of her hands across the door of the cupboard under the stairs and then knocked on it loudly, twice. Slop, if you're hiding in there, it's not fair, because I can't open the door without suckers, so come out right now if you are in there. Nelly waited and listened and sighed. I'll try upstairs. There were 15 steps to climb. All of them felt strangely spongy underfoot. They must use marshmallow instead of underlay, thought Nelly, placing her bare toes onto the landing. She stopped for a moment and flicked her eyes between 3 doors. 2 were the colour of mushy peas. The 3rd was the colour of oxtail soup. As she stepped towards the 3rd door, it slid automatically to her left. Nelly stepped into the room and looked down at a gently sloping mustard-coloured mosaic floor. In the middle of the floor was a huge brass plug hole about the size of a dustbin lid. Around the green rubber walls, rows upon rows of jacuzzi jets were pointing at her from all levels and directions. It was a shower room with enough jet power to clean a fleet of tractors. Pink fluffy towels hung from a blue plastic towel rail to her left, and a huge piece of soggy black soap lay glistening in one corner of the floor. There was no bath, and there was no slop. Nelly scratched her chin and headed for the nearest bedroom. "I'm guessing warmer, Slop," she called, half hopefully. The first of the mushy pea-coloured doors slid back, and Nelly stepped tentatively into the room. Tins of coloured eyeshadow were scattered across the floor, and a paintbrush was propped up in front of a wall-length mirror to her left. It was Splat and Dollop's bedroom. A photograph of Slop as a chrysalis hung in a gilt frame by the window, and a large double bed lay propped up against the opposite wall, not flat to the floor like a normal bed, but fixed vertically to the wall. "Oh, Squurms must sleep standing up," gasped Nelly. Her inquisitive nature suddenly gave way to a slight pang of guilt. She wasn't at all sure that she should be snooping around Splat and Dollop's bedroom. After all, bedrooms were private in her own house, and she saw no reason why they should be any different in a Squurm's home. Anyway, something told her Slop wouldn't be hiding in here. She scanned the room quickly and moved on. As she approached the second green door, it slid open to reveal Slop's bedroom. "Are you in here, Slop?" she called, placing her hands around the doorframe and peeking inside. Sure enough, a smaller bed was fixed securely and vertically to the far wall. The decor was the same: white rubber floor tiles, yellow perspex walls. There were little or no places to hide except for a small aluminium cupboard positioned directly below the bedroom window. Nelly crept into the room, crouched down, and ran her fingers across the cupboard doors. "Are you in there, Slop?" she whispered. To her relief, the doors slid open, but to her dismay, music began playing. It was a hi-fi unit, a slopless hi-fi unit at that. Nelly began to feel uneasy. She sighed heavily and looked at her watch. It was 25 to 9. Splat and Dollop would be home soon, and she still had her trainers and socks to retrieve from the sandpit and the washing up to do. Enough was enough. She'd hunted high and low, and Slop was nowhere to be found. Reluctantly, she would have to concede defeat again. "Ah, he's probably squeezed up a tap or something," sighed Nelly. "Anything to win." "All right, Slop," she cried. "You win again. Your mum and dad'll be home soon. It's time to stop playing and start tidying. You can come out now." Nelly waited for a loud gurgle and the reappearance of a victorious Slop, but neither happened. She walked to the top of the stairs and cleared her throat. "I said it's time to stop playing now, Slop. You can come out now, wherever you are." But Slop didn't come out. The house remained as eerily silent as ever. Nelly frowned and walked barefoot down the stairs. Why wasn't Slop answering? Why hadn't he stopped hiding? Where could he be? "The sandpit!" she gasped. "What if he's been sucked into the sandpit?" Nelly raced down the hallway, scooted through the lounge, burst through the beaded curtains, and charged out into the garden. She pelted to the lip of the sandpit and stared at the surface of the quicksand for signs of entry. All was still. She stared down at her toes. "I can't go in again. It's far too dangerous. Surely Slop wouldn't have hidden in here." A thought too terrifying to contemplate iced her veins. "The shredders! Maybe he's fallen into the shredder tank." She spun round hard and sprinted back into the house through the French doors. With a desperate lunge, she pressed her face hard to the glass of the aquarium. The pack of shredders flew out from behind the bricks and barked ferociously at the glass just centimetres from her face. Nelly ignored them completely and scanned every millimetre of the aquarium for signs of chewed-up slop. To her relief, there were none to be seen. "Slop! Where are you? I'm not playing anymore," she hollered. But still there was no reply. This wasn't a game anymore. It had stopped being a game some time ago. This was no fun at all, full stop. Nelly had promised the Squurms that Slop would be in safe hands, but she had absolutely no idea where he was. She double-checked the kitchen, the lounge, the hallway, and the rooms upstairs. She even went up into the loft. She called Slop's name from the front doorstep in both directions up and down Sweet Street. She knocked hard again on the cupboard under the stairs. She even looked up her own sleeves. But there was no sign of him anywhere. "Oh," What am I going to do? She groaned. Splat and Dollop will be home in 10 minutes and I haven't just lost my trainers and socks. I've lost their son. Slop, where are you? She cried. But there was no reply. Nelly squished down onto the sofa and racked her brains. She had looked absolutely everywhere she could think of. There was no time to ring any of her monster friends for help either. It was 8 minutes and counting before Dollop and Splat would return. She was on her own, in every sense of the word. She stood up dejectedly and tidied up a few games that were still scattered across the lounge floor. With a puff of her cheeks, she trudged barefoot into the kitchen and began stacking the pancake plates beside the sink. What am I going to say to Dollop and Splat? She whimpered, placing the plug into its hole and turning the taps. They're going to go bananas. One by one she placed the plates, mixing bowl and frying pan into the water. She took off her watch, glanced at the minute hand, and reached for the furry liquid. With a dejected squirt and a swish of her hand, she began cleaning the dishes with a scourer. She was in a daze. How could she possibly have lost Slop? The front door of the house had been closed, and she'd only shut her eyes for the count of 100. With a dispirited sigh, Nelly reached for the tea towel and began drying. She stacked the plates neatly to one side and then glanced again at her watch. Only 3 minutes and counting. She dried the mixing bowl and then inspected it for traces of pancake mix. Satisfied that it was clean, she returned it to the cupboard. 2 minutes and counting. With a blink and a sniff, Nelly picked up the frying pan and began wiping it dry with a cloth. She buffed the chromium base of the pan to a brilliant sparkle and then held it out for a final inspection. She tilted it first one way and then the other, and then back the original way. She stared at the base of the pan and frowned. There was a reflection there that she couldn't quite account for. It was orange, it had yellow blobs in it, and the black smiling shape of a mouth. Nelly's eyes sprang upwards. There, directly above her head, was Slop, clinging like a pancake to the ceiling. I win, Nelly, he gurgled, dropping to the kitchen floor with a squelch. It was you that gave me the idea to hide up here. You never found me, did you, Nelly? Nelly didn't know whether to squonk him or hit him with the frying pan. Slop, I've been looking for you everywhere. I know, gurgled Slop excitedly. I've been watching you. The sound of a toilet flushing drew Nelly's attention to the front door. Dollop and Splat had returned. Nelly looked at her feet and began hopping up and down. I can't answer the door with no trainers and socks on, she gasped. I'll get them for you, gurgled Slop, slithering out of the kitchen and into the garden. In the blink of 6 eyes, Slop returned from the depths of the quicksand with Nelly's trainers and socks. She quickly slipped them on and bounced down the hallway to open the door. Splat and Dollop slithered in, carrying a king-size bucket of toffee popcorn. We bought this for you, Nelly. We hope you like it, Splat gurgled. Jaffa Coog, said Nelly. Jaffa Coog very much. Splat looked at Dollop in complete amazement. I'm sorry, Nelly. What did you say? Gurgled Splat. I said Jaffa Coog, said Nelly. Jaffa Coog is Squurmese for thank you, isn't it? There's no such word, Nelly, chuckled Dollop. You haven't been playing Scrabble with Slop, have you? Among other things, said Nelly, turning to Slop with a glare. Slop gurgled sweetly and smiled at his mum and dad. We've had a fantastic time. We've played loads of games. Nelly's ever so good at coming second. We've had a wonderful time too, thanks to you, Nelly, gurgled Dollop. We had the whole cinema to ourselves. Everyone got up and left us as we walked in. Nelly smiled, crouched down and tied the laces of her trainers. She was exhausted. One thing she wouldn't be doing when she got home was playing games. She wasn't even sure she'd have the energy to fill in her secret notebook when she got home. I'll be off then, smiled Nelly, offering Dollop and Splat a goodbye handshake. Her offer was declined in favour of a cold, wet squonk on the cheek from Dollop and a double squonk on the nose from Slop. Come and play again, won't you, Nelly? Gurgled Slop from the doorstep as Nelly undid the latch on the front gate. Zibblefludge, said Nelly with a nod and a wink. Slop scratched his head with 4 feelers and looked up at his parents. Nelly closed the gate behind her and then smiled as the long, extended feeler that she had been expecting spiralled down the path and tapped her on the shoulder. It belonged, of course, to Slop.
What does stipple floods mean? He gurgled.
It's Nelly-ese for next time I win, laughed Nelly. The Water Greeps. Chapter 1. Nelly had had a phone call from the Water Greeps. How exciting, she gushed. I've never monster sat on a canal boat before. You'd better take some fish food to feed their children with, laughed her dad. No, a box of maggots, sneered Asti. Or a pot of worms, chuckled her mum. Nelly sat back in her armchair and scowled in 3 directions at once. Sorry, Nelly, said her mum. We were only joking. I wasn't, said Asti. I meant every word. I bet maggots are precisely what water creeps eat. Greeps, not creeps, glared Nelly. Greeps, schmeeps, said Asti. They can call themselves what they want. They're all creeps to me. Nelly flapped open her magazine and pretended not to listen. Asti, you shouldn't be so critical of people who aren't the same as you, said Nelly's dad, sensing that the jokes had gone far enough. They're not people, they're ugly, hideous monsters, shrugged Asti, taking a hairbrush from her handbag. The world would be a very dull place if everyone looked the same, wouldn't it, Yvonne? Continued Nelly's dad. Mum nodded slowly, placing her hand inside a packet of asparagus and sea salt crisps and focusing with a frown on the television. Look, she cried, lowering a crisp from her lips and dropping it back into the bag. That's our bank. That's our high street, and oh, look, that's Coralie Powers from the school. She's being interviewed on telly. Turn it up, someone, I've got my fingers full of crisps. Dad turned to Nelly. She had her fingers full of magazine. Nelly turned to Asti. She had her fingers full of hairbrush. Quick, said Mum, or we'll miss what's being said. Dad shifted his bum, jogged across the carpet and turned up the volume on the telly. Coralie Powers was in breathless mid-sentence. Past me, they did. 3 of them there were, brandishing shotguns. I thought, oh my good giddy, they're going to take me hostage and hold me for ransom and demand millions of pounds for me and demand a private jet to fly them to South America and send out for pizzas, you know, like they do in the movies, which is fine if you like pizzas, but I'm allergic to tomato puree, you see. The news reporter standing in the high street lowered his microphone, a little taken aback by the content of Mrs. Power's eyewitness account, but then continued with a new line of questioning. Did you see their faces? He quizzed her in earnest. Mrs. Powers nodded enthusiastically. One of them had 2 big buck teeth at the front, big round cheeks and long grey dangly ears. The second had a big black shiny nose like a mouse, a big wide smile, big staring eyes and huge black circular ears. And the third one had similar shaped eyes but a blue hat and a big orange beak like a duck. The camera switched to the reporter for a well-rehearsed look of concern. You said the robbers were carrying shotguns. Did they threaten you in any way? Mrs. Powers shook her head. No, they raced straight past me and sped off up the high street, but it doesn't end there. Oh, no. Oh, you might want to do a close-up for this bit, she whispered, beckoning the cameras forward. The strangest thing was that as they raced round the corner, the first robber's head fell clean off. The reporter smiled weakly. Do you think it's at all possible that the robbers could have been wearing masks? Mrs. Powers dropped her shopping bags to the pavement and wrung her hands. That's it! Now that you mention it, they could indeed have been wearing masks. That would explain why the first one's head looked so wobbly. I thought he'd been to the pub. The reporter turned in the direction of Nelly and her family and ended his report there and then. This is John Rippingale in Lawbridge reporting for YTV at the scene of this morning's High Street bank robbery. Nelly lowered her magazine and placed it on her lap. It's about time something exciting happened in this town, she said. You're right for once, agreed Asti. I wish I'd been there to see it. I wish they'd interviewed me. Natalie Dupre would have died of jealousy. Nelly smiled, remembering the conversation she had had with Natalie about Asti's absence of brain. How is Natalie? She hasn't been round for ages, asked Nelly innocently. We're not talking at the moment, said Asti, declining to go into details.
I wonder how much money they got away with, said Nelly's dad, returning everyone's thoughts to the bank robbers.
Couple of mil, probably, said Asti.
In used notes, elaborated Nelly. I don't think a bank in Lawbridge would have many bullion bars to steal. I don't think they would have been able to race up the high street at all if they were carrying bags of gold bars, said Mum, adding her own bit of crime analysis to the conversation.
Unless they work out. A lot of robbers work out. You need to be in good shape to rob a bank, I reckon, said Asti.
Well, there's no chance that your dad was one of the robbers then, smiled Nelly's mum, casting a disapproving look at her husband's waistline. Clifford breathed in sharply and decided to change the subject. When are your monster sitting for the Water Greeps, Nelly?
Next Saturday afternoon, she smiled, standing up and allowing her magazine to tumble from her knees to the floor. Can you give me a lift to the canal around midday next Saturday?
Sure, said her dad. I should be able to extend my taxi service in that particular direction on that particular day at that particular time, unless, of course, I decide to enlist at the local gym to particularly work on my new six-pack.
That's a date, then, laughed Nelly. 12 o'clock next Saturday it is.
Nelly turned her thoughts to her secret notebook. She'd decided to add the heading Water Greeps, despite the fact that it would be a full week before she could fill in all the monster details. She threw a contemptuous glance at Asti and headed for the hallway.
No, you can't,
she said, breezing past Asti's chair.
No, I can't what?
asked Asti.
No, you can't read my magazine, said Nelly. I've already read it, smirked Asti.
Chapter 2. Saturday arrived with a whimper and a rumble. The whimper came from Dad. He'd decided to take up jogging that morning, but had twisted his ankle turning out of the garden gate. To his acute embarrassment, he'd been forced to give up his new healthy lifestyle 30 seconds after taking it up. The rumble came from the skies. Thunder was approaching and a storm was brewing. Nelly stared out of her bedroom window in the direction of the steep, black cauliflower clouds that were banking up over the rooftops of the Montelimar Estate. It's going to be a wet one today, she muttered to herself, picking a thread of white cotton from the shoulder of her sardine sweatshirt. A wet, water-greepy day. She pulled her cagoule from her wardrobe and skipped downstairs to the lounge. There she found Asti sitting on the arm of the sofa, draping a consoling arm around her dad's shoulder. Dad was slumped rather limply in his favourite armchair, dressed in an electric blue tracksuit, minus one sock and trainer. "Make way," said Nelly's mum, bustling in from the kitchen, carrying a light blue, portable foot spa. The warm water in the plastic dish slipped and slopped as she placed it on the carpet in front of her husband's outstretched foot. "Stick your foot in there, Clifford, while I plug it in," said Mum. "Have you put the essential oils in?" winced Dad. "I'm going to need essential oils to recover from this one." "I've put some syrup of figs in," said Nelly's mum. "They're all the essential oils I've got at the moment." Nelly and Asti watched with interest as their dad lowered his sports injury into the foot spa. Mum, meanwhile, attached the plug to the wall. With a flick of the switch, the water around their dad's ankle began to stir slightly. Mum turned the dial on the front of the foot spa 2 notches to the right. "How's that?" she asked as the water began to ripple. "A little more," sighed Dad. Mum turned the switch 2 more notches and the water began to bubble. "Oh, that's better," sighed Dad. "Are you still going to be able to give me a lift to the Water Greeps?" asked Nelly. Nelly's dad's eyeballs rolled and his head flopped back into the cushions. "Nelly, I won't be going anywhere with an injury as bad as this," he winced, "unless it's a visit to the physiotherapist." "But you promised," groaned Nelly. "It's a 2-mile hike to the canal and it's about to piddle it down with rain." Asti smiled at the prospect of a soggy sister and then sighed as her mum offered a solution. "I'll give you a lift to the canal, Nelly. Make sure you're ready by 5 to 12 because I want to be back in time to watch I'm a Celebrity Loo Brush Get Me Out of Here. It starts at 12:15. "I'm all ready to go," said Nelly. "I just need to put my cagoule on." "Have you stuck the Water Greeps telephone number on the hall mirror?" asked her dad. "I'll leave you their mobile number," said Nelly.
Houseboats don't have telephone lines. Nelly didn't know what the Water Greeps had. 10 heads, webbed feet, hairy knees. As she stepped out into the rain and ran for the car, there was only one thing she could be sure of. She was about to find out. Chapter 3. The car windscreen wipers swished frantically to and fro as the rain battered and bounced the length and breadth of Sweet Street. Nelly looked back through the rear window in the direction of number 55. I wonder what the Grerks are doing right now, she thought. I never did find out if Glug won first prize at the Gog Show. The car forked right at the top of Sweet Street and splashed into Cracknell Way. Nelly's mum leant forward and wiped the windscreen with her sleeve. The car was misting up. Whereabouts is the Water Greeps houseboat, Nelly? Is it near the lockkeeper's cottage or further down? Nelly shook her head. It's further down, she replied, trying her best to be heard above the sound of the car's air blowers. Nelly's mum turned the blowers down so that Nelly could continue with her directions. They said to follow the canal road past the gasworks and down to the derelict seed factory. Their houseboat is moored up on the left just before the old cider factory demolition site. Hardly the most scenic part of the river, then, shouted Nelly's mum, turning up the blowers again to try and clear the resurgence of mist from her screen. They said their houseboat is very easy to spot because it's the only houseboat there, hollered Nelly. I'm not surprised, shouted Nelly's mum. It must be quite the ugliest spot in town. I'm sure they like it, smiled Nelly. Nelly and her mum forged on past the mental hospital and ploughed through the puddles towards the Fudge Street roundabout. A family of Grimps lived at number 81 Fudge Street. Nelly had spent hours one evening trying without success to plait their children's feathers. The sky darkened and then crackled magnesium bright. Huge raindrops fell from the heavens and began to clatter across the bonnet like marbles. Nelly jumped as an almighty thunderclap suddenly shook the sky. Thanks for the lift, Mum. I'd have got soaked, she shouted. You deserve to get soaked, monster sitting on a day like this, her mum hollered. Nelly's mum gripped the steering wheel and aquaplaned the car into Imperial Avenue. Nelly placed one hand inside the other and practised her Water Greep handshakes. If they've got webbed fingers, I'll hold out a clenched fist, she decided. If they've got no fingers, I'll go yo and tap knuckles. She thought for a moment. If they've got fins, I'll just wave. Webbed fingers, no fingers and fins seemed to cover pretty much every aquatic eventuality, unless they were like hippos. No, that just couldn't be. If Water Greeps were like hippos, the canal boat would need to be an ocean liner to support them. As the car turned sharply into Old Canal Road, Nelly and her mum began to shudder. It was cobbled all the way. The car began to vibrate as the tyres juddered along past the lockkeeper's cottage. The day boats moored along the towpath certainly cut a sorry and bedraggled sight. In fact, it was hard to imagine that in just a couple of months' time, in the height of the summer, the towpath would be astir with cream teas. The tidy clipped grass verge along the day boats for hire stretch of the canal began to give way to longer, more neglected, straggly tufts of grass. Broken stems of brown teasel hung dripping in the rain and litter tangled with last year's weeds. They were approaching the gasworks. It was unclear to Nelly why they were called the gasworks, because as far as she knew, there was no gas in them, and they certainly didn't work. In fact, no one had worked there for years. The towering cylindrical buildings just stood there, doing nothing except rusting, a cross between Stonehenge and a collection of giant upside-down cake tins. The car shuddered and juddered its soggy way across the cobbles past the gasworks and towards the seed factory. The seed factory was a sad and depressing-looking building with dark red brick walls, only barely held together by graffiti and crumbling mortar. Once upon a time, long before Nelly was born, the seed factory had bloomed, but now its grey slate roof swallowed the rain through holes the size of garage doors, and its windows stared across the canal with shattered and empty eyes. Nelly would have liked to have scooped the entire building up in her arms and given it a big cuddle. She could be strangely romantic in that way. There it is, she cried, pointing further down the towpath to a small houseboat moored up beside the crunch and crumble of the cider factory demolition site. "I can see it," said her mum, wiping her windscreen again and peering through the hole. Sure enough, just as the Water Greeps directions had promised, a small houseboat was moored up directly opposite the demolition site. "Pull up along here," said Nelly, excitedly trying to get a better look. Nelly's mum pulled the car off the cobbles and parked up in front of the padlocked entrance to the demolition site. There were no workmen in sight. The hard hats had been hung up for the weekend, and the heavy machinery lay idle and dripping in the mud. Nelly fingered a hole in the condensation of the passenger mirror and checked her appearance. Nelly's mum turned off the engine and prepared to join her daughter in a frantic dash to the door of the houseboat. "Come and meet your first monsters," laughed Nelly. "1, 2, 3, go!" they laughed, throwing open their car doors, tumbling out, slamming them to and charging through the rain towards the high-glossed yellow bow of the boat. "There's the way in!" cried Nelly, pointing to a heavily timbered door painted cherry red. Nelly and her mum dashed to the edge of the canal and looked down over the side of the boat. 3 steep, green-glossed steps beckoned. Taking each other carefully by the hand, they guided their toes over a thick tethering rope and stepped down onto the first step. With a wobble and a teeter, they negotiated steps 2 and 3 and then placed the soles of their shoes gingerly onto the deck. It was steadier underfoot than they had imagined it would be. In fact, quite astonishingly, it felt as firm on deck as it did on dock. There was another little surprise waiting for them too. It was a water greep, and it was standing in the entrance to the houseboat, waiting to greet them. Chapter 4. Nelly stepped forward confidently and held out a clenched fist. "Hello, I'm Nelly, the monster sitter. Pleased to meet you." A green, frog-like claw extended from the doorway, and a damp, membrane-like webbing closed softly around her fist.
"I'm delighted to meet you, Nelly. Please do come in. Or would you rather stay outside and enjoy this beautiful spell of weather we're having at the moment?" replied the water greep in a shrill, peeping voice. Nelly and her mum blew raindrops from the end of their noses and laughed. "I'll just make sure you're going to be okay," whispered Nelly's mum out of the corner of her mouth, "and then I'll be off." "I'll be fine," whispered Nelly, withdrawing her fist from the water greep's cold, clammy palm. "He's lovely." Nelly's idea of lovely was less than conventional. A black, eely head, long, sinuous, mottled green legs, and a shimmering torso of glistening yellow fish scales which stopped at the waist and shoulders and had the curious look of a sleeveless disco jumper. It was a toss-up as to which sparkled most, the scales on the water greep's chest or the eye in the middle of its head. It was a single, solitary eye, the size of a saucer. It had a jet-black pupil in the centre, ringed with red and white, and had a glistening, watery sheen. Nelly had seen an eye like that before somewhere. It was on the herring counter in the local supermarket. "Do come in inside and meet everyone," peeped the water greep. "The children are busting to meet you, Nelly."
"Would you mind if I popped in for a moment too, Mr. Greep?" said Nelly's mum, unable to suppress her desire to have a nosy inside.
"Oh, be my guest,"
peeped the greep, stepping to one side and welcoming them through the low cabin door with an extravagant sweep of its arm.
"Come inside and meet my husband and children."
Oops, thought Nelly and her mum simultaneously. He was a she. Nelly's mum postponed her interest in celebrity loo brushes for a moment and followed Nelly inside the cabin.
"Mind your head,"
peeped a chorus of excited voices from inside the boat. Nelly and her mum ducked beneath the yellow-glossed lintel of the door and looked up. There, sitting politely on a bench of green plastic cushions to the right of a low-ceilinged cabin, were 3 water greep children. To the left, standing small and proud, was their water greep father. At first there was little to distinguish Dad from Mum, but as Nelly held out her fist to greet him, a red spiky crest rose from the top of his head and bristled like a perch fin. Nelly smiled, and her mum squirmed as the water greep extended both frog-like arms at once and closed his web fingers around theirs in a double clammy handshake.
It's an honour to meet you, Nelly. My name is Drip, he peeped. This is my wife, Drop, and these are our 3 children, Plip, Plop, and Seaview.
5 large shimmering herring eyes turned in the direction of Nelly's mum.
And you must be...
Mrs. Morton, Nelly's mum, call me Yvonne, said Nelly's mum, a little flustered. After all, she'd never spoken to a monster before.
There's a river called Yvonne,
peeped Seaview excitedly.
No, there's a river called Avon,
peeped Plop, the eldest of the 3 brothers. Nelly's mum laughed. Well, what time do you need picking up, Nelly? She asked, quite reassured that Nelly would be very much at home with the Water Greeps. Is 5 o'clock okay? Nelly asked, craning her head slightly sideways to admire the crest of Drip's head fin in profile. It looked a bit like a punk's hairdo.
5 o'clock would be splendid, Nelly,
peeped Drip.
We've heard there's a boat jumble sale in the recreation park this afternoon. We've never been to one before, and we're rather keen to go. You can never have too many anchors, explained Drop. I'm absolutely sure we'll be back by 5, peeped Drip. But we can return earlier if you'd rather.
Nelly smiled at Plip, Plop and Seaview. They wanted Nelly to monster sit for as long as possible. 5 is fine, Nelly reassured them. I hope it stops raining or you'll be the only ones at the jumble sale. I'll give you a lift if you like, said Nelly's mum, who by now had lost all interest in celebrity loo brushes. I shall be driving home that way anyway, so I won't be going out of my way, she fibbed.
Oh, how very kind, peeped Drip. We'll be ready in 2 bristles of a knotter's whisker.
I'll be waiting in the car outside, said Nelly's mum, casting one final inquisitive glance around the Water Greeps' living quarters and then blowing Nelly a kiss and placing it onto her cheek. Nelly squeezed her mum's hand affectionately and then joined Plip, Plop and Seaview on the green plastic cushions. The 3 brothers giggled. They couldn't wait for their parents to go. Drip and Drop disappeared through a navy blue door at the stern end of the boat. Do you get a lot of otters around here? Inquired Nelly, quite keen to see one herself.
Notters, not otters,
peeped Plop. Nelly looked up with interest. She'd obviously misheard Drip earlier.
They're like otters, but they're not otters. That's why we called them notters,
explained Plip. Nelly nodded slowly and then stepped across the cabin to get a view of the canal. Well, you must tell me if you see one, she said.
Will do,
peeped Seaview. Drip and Drop emerged from the low blue door and climbed 2 steps up to cabin level.
We're ready,
they peeped.
Be good for Nelly, won't you, children?
They continued.
If you're not, Nelly won't want to come and monster sit again.
Plip, Plop and Seaview nodded in unison.
We promise,
they peeped obediently. Nelly waved goodbye to Drip and Drop as they left the cabin and then watched through the rain-drizzled glass of a porthole window as they frog-hopped off the boat and over to the car. Nelly's mum was waiting for them, getting wetter than ever. She tottered across the cobbles in her heels, opened and closed the rear passenger doors in turn, and then scuttled back to the driver's seat. With the clunk of the driver's door, a rev of the engine and a frenzied wicker-whacker of wiper blades, they drove away. What shall we do, shipmates? Laughed Nelly.
You're the captain,
peeped Plop. Chapter 5. Nelly eased back into the cushions and placed her arms around Seaview and Plip. Well, we may find we're a little restricted as to what we can do, she said, running her eyes from one end of the small cabin to the other. It's far too wet for me to play outside, even with my cagoule on. And if you don't mind me saying, inside here it's a little... She paused, anxious not to say the wrong thing.
A little what?
Peeped Plop. A little, little, explained Nelly. A little cramped, she expanded, if you don't mind me saying. The 3 brothers laughed.
There's gallons more space downstairs, Nelly. Come and see,
Seaview grabbed Nelly by the hand and pulled her through the low-beamed cabin towards the door that Drip and Drop had just emerged from. Nelly ducked her head and stepped gingerly through the doorway into pitch darkness. "Oh, where are we going?" she whispered as the steps beneath her feet began to turn like a spiral staircase, leading her down, down and further down beneath the hull of the boat.
"You see?"
peeped Plip excitedly. Nelly couldn't see at all. She steadied herself on the walls with the flats of her hands and then blinked hard as the light suddenly returned. She rubbed her eyes and then opened her mouth wide. The Water Greeps didn't live in the houseboat at all. They lived below it, in an underwater penthouse fashioned entirely out of glass. "It's amazing!" gasped Nelly, turning her head slowly in all directions. The room she was standing in was like an underwater conservatory, posh enough to feature in any interiors magazine. It was lit with flickering oil lamps that had the unmistakable aroma of pilchards. Sculpted glass furniture was tastefully displayed across a polished aqua blue glass floor. Above her head was a sculpted glass ceiling, and in front of her stretched a wide, bow-fronted glass wall. The wall was as wide as 2 cinema screens and arced widely around the boat in the shape of the letter D. At either end it was fixed securely to the brickwork of the canal wall with enormous glass bolts. The ceiling swept low and was moulded around the hull and glued watertight to the timbers with ship's tar. There were no drips or leaks or puddles to worry about. Every join in the glass was sealed as tightly as a clamshell.
"That's our garden,"
piped Plip, pointing through the glass wall. Nelly peered through the crystal-clear glass into the soupier depths of the canal. She had a wide-screen aquarium view of the canal bed in both directions.
"It's where we play,"
piped Seaview.
"Mum and Dad aren't keen on us playing indoors because sometimes we break things." "You break things, Seaview. Plip and I don't,"
piped Plop. Seaview blushed and looked sideways at a lava lamp sitting recessively on a glass display cabinet to the far right of the curved wall. Inside the lamp, a lumpen clump of frog spawn sat motionless at the bottom.
"The frog spawn used to float up and down in funny wobbly blobs,"
piped Seaview.
"Until Seaview knocked it over,"
explained Plop. Nelly nodded, but she wasn't really listening. Her eye had been drawn to the other end of the room, to a highly polished tangle of iron and brass.
"Mum and Dad collect anchors," explained Plip. "I don't know why. Anchors are pretty boring if you ask me."
"And me," nodded Nelly.
"And us,"
nodded his 2 brothers. Nelly nodded again, but more to herself. A giant underwater room, sealed with ship's tar, huge glass bolts, plus the extra weight of an anchor collection. No wonder the Water Greeps' home feels so rock-steady underfoot. This houseboat isn't going anywhere.
"Look, it's Meps,"
piped Seaview.
"He's come to play. Is it all right if we go out to play with Meps, Nelly?"
Nelly's eyes floated upwards from the anchors and then stuck like limpets to the glass wall. A monstrous pike with a shiny red fishing lure dangling from its upper jaw was peering back at them through the glass. It had yellow and black eyes and a long mottled green body that tapered powerfully downwards to a strangely waggy tail.
"He wants to play fetch,"
piped Seaview affectionately.
"Can we go and play fetch with Meps?"
Meps wagged his tail again and then, with an extraordinary flip, did a kayak roll over onto his back and played dead.
"He does all kinds of tricks,"
laughed Plip. "He's huge! He's enormous!" gasped Nelly. "He must be over 20 pounds in weight."
"He is,"
laughed Plop.
"He's the canal record, but he's never been caught." "He never will be either,"
peeped Plip.
"If anyone hooks him, we just cut the line."
Meps sprang to life again and began tail-walking excitedly in front of the window. "He's not going to have you for lunch, is he?" asked Nelly, a little unsure whether to let the brothers play outside or not.
"Of course he isn't,"
laughed Plip, Plop and Seaview.
Maps wouldn't hurt us for the world.
OK, then, if you're sure, nodded Nelly. But don't go too far away from the houseboat. Stay where I can keep an eye on you, and if you have any problems, tap on the glass.
We will,
promised the Water Greep brothers, hopping excitedly up the spiral staircase. Oh dear, thought Nelly. I sounded just like my mum then. She took off her cagoule, lifted up a glass armchair and placed it directly opposite the glass window. She was just adjusting the left front leg slightly to the right when the water in front of the window exploded into bubbles. Plop, Plip and Seaview had jumped into the canal from the top deck above and were waving at her through the glass. Chapter 6. Nelly could see everything through the thick glass, but hear nothing. She waved back at them like a mime artist and then settled back in the glass chair to enjoy the fun and games, not to mention the view. Despite the murky brown appearance of the canal from the towpath, the water below the surface wasn't that unclear. It was a bit like looking into a cup of weak tea. In fact, in a matter of mere moments, Nelly's vision had adjusted quite well. The bed of the canal was blanketed with brown silt and looked a bit like a soft lunar landscape. Here and there, strange lumps and bumps jutted up from the bottom, revealing the whereabouts of litter and junk that had been tossed into the water over the years. There was the buckled shape of a pram wheel, the wonky spout of a watering can, and over to the far left, close to the canal wall opposite, a discarded supermarket trolley. There was a brass bed knob too, not concealed beneath the silt, but torpedoing through the water, leaving a fizz of small bubbles behind it. It had been thrown by Plop and was being hotly pursued by Meps. Nelly watched in amusement as the bed knob crunched into the silkweed hanging from the submerged brickwork on the opposite canal wall. Ouch! She winced as Mep's nose crunched headlong into the wall after it. The bed knob plummeted to the base of the wall and landed softly, kicking up a cloudy puff of silt around it. The red fishing lure fluttered and then rattled as Meps shook himself in a daze and then dived in hot pursuit. With a flick of his tail and a snap of his jaws, the bed knob emerged from another puff of silt and was on its way back to Plop. The 3 Water Greeps clapped silent applause through the water and prepared to send Meps scuttling in a new direction. 2 new directions, actually, for as Plop unleashed the bed knob 20 metres bowards, Plip hurled an old toilet cistern bullcock 30 metres sternwards. Meps lunged one way and then the other before finally electing to retrieve the orange bullcock first. With a thrash of his tail and a thrust of his fins, he powered past Nelly and up the canal. More silt erupted in the wake of Mep's tail as he snapped up the bullcock just centimetres from the canal bed. He turned triumphantly with the prize in his mouth and then set his sights on the bed knob that had landed some 50 metres the other way. Plip, Plop and Seaview clapped encouragingly again and beckoned Meps back in their direction. Meps obliged for 2 of the 50 metres but then suddenly slowed and dropped like a submarine to the bottom of the canal. A shoal of silver bait fish were approaching, unaware that they were about to become dish of the day. Meps concealed himself in the silt and allowed the shoal of roach and bream to pass overhead. Then, with a whisker-fine flick of his pectoral fins, he turned silently and followed in stealthy pursuit. It was game over. Meps disappeared out of sight up the canal, and Nelly turned, only to find Plip, Plop and Seaview riding past the window, on 3 rusty bikes. She rubbed her eyes and leaned forward disbelievingly, but it was true. Their long frog-like legs were turning well-oiled rusty pedals and their webbed claws were steering corroded and broken handlebars in circular patterns through the silt. One by one they removed their claws from the handlebars and waved with both hands through the glass. Nelly raised her hand and waved back, open-mouthed. Whatever would they be doing next? After 6 or 7 circuits and a brief but soundless discussion, the 3 Water Greeps turned in the direction of the opposite canal wall, kicked out with their legs, and swam frog-style over to the upturned supermarket trolley. As the rusty bicycles fell weightlessly back onto the canal bed, Plip and Plop heaved the holly right side up, and Seaview hopped into the grocery basket with another wave. Nelly waved back and then squinted as a thick cloud of muddy brown silt mushroomed upwards from the trolley wheels. It was underwater Grand Prix go-kart time, Formula 3 style, with one water greep up front and 2 water greeps doing the pushing. The water muddied in an instant as the shopping trolley wheels skidded hard into the canal bed before speeding away past the window. Nelly rubbed the glass with her sleeve and tried her best to keep track of their whereabouts as the clouds of silt began to build. But it was no use. Backwards and forwards the brothers sped, racing like maniacs in all directions. The more canal bed they covered, the murkier the water became. Sometimes she caught a glimpse of Plip up front, other times he was doing the pushing. Sometimes it was Plop's legs that paddled close by the window, and on other occasions there was a cheeky wave from Seaview. But most of the time she could see almost nothing. The weak tea had turned to cocoa. There was nothing she could see, and there was nothing she could do, except wait patiently by the window for the silt to settle and the 3 little Schumackers to reappear. Nelly eased back into her glass armchair as the cocoa-coloured canal water swirled and eddied before her. She wondered if it had stopped raining outside. It was impossible to tell from down here. She wondered if her mum had dropped Drip and Drop off at the boat sale okay, and if she'd ever made it back in time to see the flush challenge at the end of I'm a Celebrity Loo Brush, get me out of here. She wondered what would be for tea that night, and she wondered if there would be enough purple ink in her gel pen to write everything she needed to write about the Water Greeps in her secret notebook. She wondered whether Drip and Drop had an underwater window cleaner or whether they polished all the glass by themselves. And no wonder she wondered. The Water Greeps' home was a wondrous place indeed. Nelly scratched her nose, peered over towards the anchor collection, and then surveyed the rest of the room. There was a glass dining area located beneath the bow end of the hull, and in the centre of an oval glass table there appeared to be a glass fruit bowl full of green stalks. Nelly stood up and walked over to the table for a closer inspection. The stalks had small circular green leaves. It was watercress, or something very similar. "Ugh, not my favourite nibbles," shuddered Nelly, glancing up at a glass shelf unit that was fixed just below the hull to the clean red bricks of the near-side towpath wall. The shelves were lined like a spice rack, but with larger, pickle-sized jars. There were no pickles, of course. According to the spidery writing on the handwritten labels, there was duckweed, lily pad, king cup, yellow flag, watermint, and bulrush. "Ha! Vegetarians," thought Nelly. "Water Greeps are vegetarians. No wonder Mum took a shine to them." She was just about to lift down the duckweed jar and give it a sniff, when a sharp tap-tap drew her attention back to the window. The water in the canal had begun to clear, and the outlines of Plip, Plop and Seaview were finally filtering through. It seemed the underwater shopping trolley Grand Prix had run its course, and now they had turned their minds to something else. Each was hopping weightlessly from foot to foot outside the window and grinning from ear to ear. There was something else. Each had something in their hand that they were enthusiastically waving. Nelly waved back at them with a smile, and then stepped inquisitively towards the window. What exactly was it that they were waving? Nelly took another step forward, and her blood ran cold. Shotguns! Nelly leapt towards the window and waved her hands like a mad thing. Seaview tap-tapped the barrels of his shotgun on the glass again and waved excitedly back. "No!" shouted Nelly. "Put them down! You mustn't play with those! They're dangerous!" Plip, Plop and Seaview watched innocently through the glass. They couldn't hear a word that Nelly was saying. With hops and cheeky smiles, they raised the shotguns above their heads and brandished them like 3 musketeers. Nelly hopped up and down like a puppet. "Put them down! Put them down!" she hollered at the very top of her voice. "You'll kill yourselves!" Plip, Plop and Seaview waved the shotguns playfully and began to hop like puppets too. They thought Nelly was playing some kind of copying game. It was no use. Nelly had to do something, and she had to do it fast. She thrust her hand into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out her mobile phone. Hurling it onto the polished glass floor, she spun like a tornado and raced back up the spiral stairs. Plip, Plop and Seaview watched through the glass in amazement and then ducked into the bed of the canal as a jacuzzi of bubbles and green jeans depth-charged over their heads. Nelly had jumped into the water too. She was 2 meters under. Her mouth was shut tight and her eyes were bulging. She could make out the shapes of the 3 brothers beneath her, but she couldn't open her mouth to speak for fear of drowning. She stabbed her fingers wildly in the direction of the shotguns and shook her head with gobstopper eyes. Plip, Plop and Seaview looked at the shotguns and then stared dumbly at each other. Whatever was Nelly trying to say? Nelly's lungs began to burst and her legs began to thrash. She couldn't stay underwater for very much longer. She stabbed desperately again at the shotguns and then redirected her stabbing fingers to the surface of the canal. A stream of bubbles began to seep from the corner of her mouth and her elbows began to flap. With a shake of her head and a kick of her feet, she ballooned back up to the surface. As her face broke the surface of the water, the air from inside her lungs whistled from her cheeks. With a splutter and a gasp, she craned her head in all directions, hoping desperately that Plip, Plop and Seaview would appear. One by one, the barrels of 3 shotguns periscoped above the surface of the canal, followed by the glistening herring eyes of the 3 brothers.
"What's up, Nelly?"
asked Plop casually.
What's up?
Spluttered Nelly, treading water as well as she could, fully clothed.
I'll tell you what's up,
she gasped, snatching the shotguns from the brothers' claws.
Have you any idea what these are?
The brothers shook their heads.
They're shotguns,
gurgled Nelly. The weight of the guns was causing her to sink again. Plip, Plop and Seaview swam forward blankly and lifted her shoulders out of the water. They had no idea what a shotgun was or meant.
Help me out,
spluttered Nelly, placing the guns awkwardly under one arm. The 3 Water Greep brothers paddled Nelly to the side of the boat and hoisted her back onto the deck. There she lay, like a bundle of soggy laundry plucked from a washing machine in mid-cycle.
"Tell us what a shotgun is, Nelly,"
piped Plip.
Let me get my breath back first, gasped Nelly. Let me get this minnow out of my ear.
Chapter 7. With the minnow removed, air back in her lungs, and a circle of oil lamps placed around her for warmth, a relieved Nelly sank back into the polished glass chair by the window and prepared to lecture Plip, Plop and Seaview on the dangers of playing with firearms. Nelly had first been careful to remove the 3 shotguns to a position of maximum safety high up on the shelf in place of the pickle jars. As the Water Greeps dipped in and began munching on watermint and bulrush heads, Nelly leant forward with a frown of deep concern. "I'll tell you what a shotgun is," she cautioned, holding an imaginary barrel with one hand and a trigger with the finger of her other hand. "It's a click at one end and a kaboom at the other end." A startled Plip, Plop and Seaview paused in mid-munch as Nelly rocked back in her seat with the imaginary force of both barrels. "A shotgun is a dangerous weapon that hunters use to kill rabbits and pigeons and pheasants," continued Nelly. "Gangsters use shotguns. Bank robbers use shotguns." Nelly stopped in mid-flow. "Bank robbers use shotguns," she murmured. Her eyes flashed to the shelf and then back to the 3 brothers. "Where did you get them?" she asked. "When did you get them?"
"Seaview found them," peeped Plop. "At the bottom of the canal, didn't you, Seaview?" "Last Saturday," nodded Seaview. "Last Saturday afternoon. They were in a sack under the water at the bottom of the towpath wall."
Nelly clapped her hands and turned police inspector on the spot. Let me think. The bank robbery was last Saturday. There were 3 robbers, and they were all armed with shotguns. A week has gone by, and the robbers haven't been caught, and the shotguns haven't been found. Until now. Seaview has found 3 shotguns hidden in a sack at the bottom of the canal. They must belong to the robbers. The robbers must have dropped them into the canal thinking they would never ever be found. But they have. Seaview has found 3 major clues. "Seaview!" Nelly exclaimed. "Seaview? Why are you called Seaview?" she faltered, momentarily sidetracked by a question she had been meaning to ask ever since she'd been introduced.
"It was my idea,"
explained Plip proudly.
I saw the name on the side of another canal boat.
Nelly let the explanation sink in, shook her head, and then returned immediately to a more significant line of questioning. Seaview, can you remember exactly where you found the shotguns? And can you remember exactly where you put the sack? Seaview puffed out the yellow fish scales on his chest and nodded again. He was beginning to feel rather important.
They were over there, about 120 metres further down the towpath, right in line with the centre of the first gasworks chimney. You can see the chimney through the water.
And the sack? Quizzed Nelly.
I gave the sack to Mum and Dad,
said Seaview. Excellent, said Nelly, promoting herself from inspector to master criminal detective. We'll need the sack for evidence. Plip and Plop turned to Seaview and then looked awkwardly at their reflections in the glass floor.
Dad uses the sack to polish the anchors with,
explained Plop, a little embarrassed. Nelly frowned. It was the first setback of her criminal investigation. She stared at the anchors, peered at the shelf, and then began scouring the floor. We need to ring the police, she said, deciding to call for backup. Where's my mobile? I'm sure I threw it down here somewhere. Nelly had been smart enough not to jump into the canal with her mobile in her pocket, but not smart enough to place it somewhere that was easily to hand. Plip, Plop and Seaview joined Nelly on their claws and knees and began searching the floor.
Found it,
piped Plop, crawling out from underneath the table and holding Nelly's mobile phone above his head. The mobile had skidded like an ice hockey puck a full 20 metres across the polished floor. Well done, Plop, cried Nelly. Let's hope I've still got some credits left. They were in luck, and the police were on their way. Chapter 8. It had finally stopped raining. The clouds had parted, and at last the sun was trying to peep out. Nelly was peeping out too. Her face was pressed flat to a porthole window in the cabin upstairs. She was really quite excited. Everyone was. They'd never played key roles in a criminal investigation before.
Those are knotters,
piped Seaview, pointing through a porthole further down. Nelly craned her head right and then laughed. They're not knotters, and they're not otters either. They're rats.
We called them knotters,
piped Plip. We call them horrible smelly rats, laughed Nelly, watching two long brown rat tails thread between some building rubble in the demolition site outside. And we call those police cars, announced Nelly. The police hadn't wasted any time. Sirens were fast approaching, their scream and wail changing to a high-pitched yodel as the tyres hit the cobbles on the towpath. Nelly turned to Seaview excitedly. She could see one patrol car and a white forensic van too. As the vehicles drew up alongside the canal boat, Nelly was already opening the cherry-red door of the cabin and stepping out to greet them. Two policemen climbed out of the patrol car and acknowledged Nelly with serious nods. One wore glasses and had a caterpillar-thin moustache. The other was younger with ginger eyebrows that met in the middle. The forensic team took longer to emerge from their van. Apparently, they were having trouble getting their fingers into their rubber gloves. The moustache introduced himself first.
Sergeant Shrew, he shouted. Can I come aboard?
This way, said Nelly, flapping the palms of her hands in the direction of the cabin. Come and meet the Water Greeps. Both police officers strode purposefully across the towpath and stepped down onto the deck. Follow me, said Nelly. The two policemen ducked low beneath the lintel of the door and stopped inside the houseboat. They were greeted by the three Water Greep brothers.
Hello, Mr. Policeman,
they waved. This is Plip, Plop and Seaview, said Nelly. Seaview is the one that found the shotguns. Seaview sat up tall and proud for a moment and nodded importantly. Can I take your full names, please? Said the constable, taking out his notebook and licking the point of his pencil.
I'll give you mine if you give me yours,
piped Seaview. The ginger eyebrows arched above the notepad and then turned in the direction of Sergeant Shrew. Sergeant Shrew shrugged his shoulders and nodded. My name is P.C. Plum, said the constable.
Paddle thump,
piped Seaview.
Seaview paddle thump. Plop paddle thump,
said Plop.
Plip, paddle, thump,
said Plip. And I'm Petronella Morton, added Nelly. Call me Nelly for short.
And do you all live together on the houseboat?
Asked the sergeant. No, I'm monster sitting for their mum and dad, explained Nelly. They'll be back around 5.
And your address would be?
Quizzed the sergeant. 119 Sweet Street, answered Nelly, over on the Montelimar Estate.
I know Sweet Street very well, said the sergeant. We were over there last Thursday evening, returning a stray bat to number 322.
The door of the cabin opened once again, and the sergeant and constable were joined by the forensic team. One was a man and one was a woman, although it was kind of difficult to tell who was which. They were dressed from top to toe in white one-piece suits that stretched like baby rompers over their shoes and tucked tightly with a drawstring around their faces. It was only the lipstick that gave the woman away. They'd come armed with an impressive variety of portable equipment, ranging from high-tech widgets to state-of-the-art digital gadgets. You need to dust for fingerprints, said Nelly as they squeezed onto the long seat in between the sergeant and constable. Sergeant Shrew eased the congestion by standing up and pacing up and down carefully, trying not to bump his head.
Kindly leave the orders to me, Miss Morton. I shall be conducting this inquiry.
Nelly turned to Seaview and smiled. Is there a reward? She asked excitedly. The sergeant scanned the interior of the cabin and stroked his moustache. He quite fancied the idea of living on a houseboat himself.
There is a reward,
he nodded slowly.
A reward of £50,000 has been offered for information leading to the capture, arrest and conviction of the 3 criminals. We already have 3 suspects under surveillance, said the sergeant, but as yet no clues to nail them with.
I'll get the guns, said Nelly.
No,
said the sergeant with a stern wag of his finger.
You won't get the guns. I'll get the guns, he insisted. I don't want any of you youngsters touching dangerous firearms.
But you don't know where they are,
piped Seaview innocently.
How can you get them if you don't know where they are?
The sergeant looked at the constable. The constable looked at the forensic team. Seaview had made an obvious but fair point.
OK, you show us where the guns are first, and then my colleagues here will get them before proceeding with their painstaking forensic analysis.
Good idea, said Nelly, leading the police team to the top of the spiral stairs. You'll need to test the sack for DNA too, said Nelly, tugging on the elbow of a white suit.
I'll give the orders, thank you,
coughed Sergeant Shrew. Nelly then led the police team below deck and over to the shelf where the guns had been safely placed. In the meantime, Plip, Plop and Seaview went looking for the sack. They found it, screwed up and dripping with flug wax over by the anchors. Dad had been busy polishing only that morning and had every intention of continuing when he returned home from the boat jumble sale. Seaview screwed up his face and raised the sack in the air. A smoking puddle of waxy green slime trickled from each sodden corner. Forensics looked at each other and shook their heads. Whatever flug wax was, it was caustic and strong enough to wipe even the stubbornest clues clean away. But all was far from lost. The sergeant's eyes lit up as he raised his chin to shelf level and spied the shotguns that had been placed there. This was precisely the break his investigation needed. He didn't need sacks when he had shotguns. In fact, the guns were such significant pieces of evidence he could almost see the word promotion written over each one. All forensic had to do now was dust them for fingerprints, match them to the 3 suspects, and the case would be in the bag. The sergeant and constable stepped aside as the rubber-gloved fingers of the lipsticked forensic officer removed the guns from the shelf for a closer inspection.
Fakes,
she said, peering down the barrels in turn and then tapping the wooden stocks with the back of her finger.
Very convincing fakes, but fakes nevertheless. What does she mean?
Whispered Seaview. She means they're not real guns, said Nelly, a little relieved.
So they wouldn't have gone kaboom?
Asked Plop. Only click, nodded Nelly. Real or not, the guns were crucial evidence. You'll need to take our fingerprints too, said Nelly, for elimination purposes. Sergeant Shrew frowned.
I was just about to say that, he groused.
Me first,
piped Seaview, hopping onto a chair beside the table and offering 3 webbed fingers to the taller of the 2 forensic officers. The male forensic officer looked uncertainly at Seaview's clammy digits and handed the portable fingerprinter to his colleague.
I'll dust the guns,
he shuddered. One by one, Nelly and the Water Greeps held out their fingers and watched excitedly as each was rolled in turn across a small digital pad. I thought you used ink pads, said Nelly.
This is the modern police force, said Sergeant Shrew. It takes cutting-edge techniques to track down today's modern criminal minds.
Our prints are very different to yours, Nelly,
laughed Plop, whose spindly claws had produced something closer to a potato print than a fingerprint, a very slim potato at that, more like a French fry. Nelly smiled and then watched with interest as the shotguns were gently dusted with fine powder by the male forensic officer and then delicately brushed in turn. You need an infrared scanner now, said Nelly.
He knows he does,
sighed the sergeant. That makes the fingerprints show up, said Nelly. I know it does, murmured the forensic duster. The sergeant and constable crowded eagerly around the table as the forensic officer took a small fingerprint scanner like an iPod out of his tunic pocket and passed it over the dusted guns. Plip, Plop and Seaview shielded their eyes as the purple light from the scanner passed along the lengths of the shotguns. Everyone held their breaths for a moment as the forensic officer raised the scanner studiously to his eyes. He passed the scanner to his colleague for confirmation. Her eyes darted to and fro for a moment, first to the shotguns on the table, then back to the scanner readings, and then over to the French fry prints. Well, said Nelly, unable to contain her excitement.
Yes, well,
echoed the sergeant, unable to suppress his excitement and sensing an imminent promotion to chief inspector as well. There are only 2 sets of fingerprints on these shotguns, said the male forensic officer, loosening the drawstring around his face and lowering his hood. One belongs to a Water Greep, the other belongs to Miss Morton. Nelly turned to Plip, Plop and Seaview and pinched her face with a crumpled look of disappointment. Oh, you mean there are no bank robber fingerprints on any of the guns at all? She sighed. None at all, said the forensic officer. So Seaview won't be getting his reward?
Not at this rate,
shrugged the constable.
I knew there wouldn't be any fingerprints,
peeped Seaview.
They were wearing gloves.
Everyone wheeled round and stared at Seaview. You mean you saw them? Gasped Nelly.
Oh, yes,
nodded Seaview.
I was on the bottom of the canal bed by the towpath wall when they dropped the sack in. They peered right into the water to make sure the guns had sunk to the bottom.
And they didn't see you? Asked Nelly.
Oh, no, said Seaview, but I saw them.
And would you recognise them if you saw them again? Pressed Nelly, thrilled to be back on the bank robber's trail.
Oh, yes,
piped Seaview, puffing his chest out further than ever.
Why on earth didn't you say you'd seen them before? Piped Plop. Nobody asked me,
piped Seaview, deflating a little. Ahem, said the constable.
Yes, ahem, barked the sergeant. Do you think I might possibly be permitted to ask some questions myself? After all, may I remind you, I am the senior officer in charge of this investigation.
Go ahead, said Nelly.
Thank you,
said the sergeant, motioning to the constable to reopen his notebook and relick the point of his pencil. Ask Seaview if he can take you back to the very spot where the robbers stood to look for footprints, said Nelly.
I was just about to, thundered the sergeant.
Ask him if he would be happy to look at some photographs of the suspects to see if he can give you a positive ID, piped Plop.
I was just about to do that too, roared the sergeant.
Then ask him what he's going to buy with the reward money, piped Plip.
The sergeant's knuckles turned white and his face began to twitch with barely controlled frustration. With a squeak and a jibber-jabber, he snatched the pad from the constable's hand, threw it onto the polished glass floor and began to jump up and down on it.
I'd better take over, said the constable. Now then, what was your first question?
Chapter 9. A trip along the towpath proved fruitless. The rain had fallen so heavily that morning that any chance of finding the bank robbers' footprints had been completely washed away. The forensic team probed and combed the footpath for almost an hour, but there was nothing to see or find. The constable led Nelly and the Water Greeps back to the houseboat. There they found the sergeant standing sternly by the tethering rope with a black leather police file under his arm. He'd managed to regain his composure and was ready to resume control of the inquiry. He coughed, a little embarrassed by his earlier loss of command.
If you'd like to accompany me back onto the houseboat, Master Paddlesump, I would be most obliged if you would cast your not inconsiderable eye over some of the images in my police file.
Seaview blinked at Nelly. He didn't have a clue what the sergeant was on about. He wants you to look at some pictures in his photo album to see if you can spot the 3 bank robbers.
Oh, okay.
Piped Seaview, puffing his chest out again.
If they're there, I'll spot them for sure.
Everyone felt encouraged. After all, Seaview had been quite insistent that he had had a very good look at the robbers, and an eye as big as Seaview's must be worth that of 20 ordinary witnesses. They returned to the conservatory beneath the hull and gathered around the glass table. Seaview was given pride of place at the top end where the heavy black police file awaited.
Take your time, said Sergeant Shrew. Turn each page slowly and look at each photo carefully. If you recognise any of the men in the book, I want you to tap them twice on their left shoulder with your finger and say, "He's the one."
Can I look too? Asked Nelly.
Oh, if you must,
sighed the sergeant. Nelly squeezed up alongside Seaview and peered inquisitively over his shoulder. Seaview reached forward with his spindly, froggy claw and opened the first page. All eyes fell on Seaview's one eye. The black bullet pupil in the bull's-eye red centre stared intently at the first photograph and then progressed steadily to the next and the next. Nelly was quite surprised by the rogues on display. None of the criminals looked like criminals at all. There were no scars or scowls or boxer-flattened noses. Everyone looked quite normal. In fact, if this was what criminals looked like, then Nelly half fancied there was a chance of seeing her science teacher in there. Seaview turned the first page and suddenly looked up at the constable.
"It's my good-for-nothing cousin,"
explained the constable, a little embarrassed to be related in any way at all to a mugshot. The sergeant tutted, Nelly giggled, and Seaview returned to the book. One by one, whisker by whisker, freckle by freckle, dimple by dimple, Seaview studied every feature of every face. Sometimes he paused long, and most times he stared hard, but each time he moved on. Finally, with a sigh and a shake of his head, he closed the book.
It's no one in here, he said. Sorry.
Nelly, Plip and Plop groaned with disappointment. They were sure Seaview would come up trumps, but instead they had reached a dead end. No one was more disappointed than Sergeant Shrew.
No one? No one, you say? Surely there must be some mistake. Have another look,
he said, opening the book, pulling 3 passport-sized mugshots out of the file and placing them on the glass table with a tap of his finger.
Have another really good look at these 3.
Seaview stared at the 3 photographs in turn and then shook his head.
The hair colour is right. In fact, it's an exact match, he piped. But the shape of their heads is all wrong. The bank robbers' heads were much more curvy than that. Their foreheads were much deeper, and their chins stuck right out to the left. Their eyes were much more over to the right, too.
They sound a right bunch of weirdos, said the constable, forgetting the company he was in. They didn't have masks on, did they? Asked Nelly before the sergeant could.
Definitely not,
said Seaview, feeling quite deflated.
They definitely weren't wearing masks, and it definitely wasn't them.
Well, that's that then, isn't it?
Said Sergeant Shrew, nodding to the constable to pack up his notebook.
Our trail has gone colder than a polar bear's bum.
Sorry,
said Seaview.
Oh, there's no need to be sorry,
said the sergeant.
I wish every member of the community was as helpful to the police as you. You should think about joining the force yourself one day.
I'd like that,
piped Seaview. Nelly left the table and walked tetchily over to the window. She stared into the depths of the canal and racked her brains. She'd missed something. Everyone had missed something. They were far too close to catching the robbers for them to slip through their fingers now. She looked at her watch. The dial had steamed up after the plunge she had taken earlier, but the hands were still moving freely. It was 20 to 5. Her mum would be arriving soon to pick her up, and Drip and Drop would be dropping back too. She stared blankly at the silted lumps and bumps littering the canal bed, and then peered upwards at the surface of the water. The surface of the water. The surface of the water.
That's it! She cried.
PC Plum jumped, dropping his notepad in the process, and then Sergeant Shrew somersaulted across the floor in a panic, fumbling hopelessly for his truncheon.
What's what?
He spluttered. I must ring my mum before she leaves, said Nelly, plucking her mobile phone from her pocket. Everyone watched nonplussed as Nelly raised the mobile to her ear. Mum, where are you? She said. I need you to go back. I need you to turn round and bring something to the houseboat. I know. Oh, but I need you to. Please. The foot spar. Bring the foot spar to the houseboat. The sergeant looked at the constable. The Water Greeps looked at each other. No one knew what Nelly was up to. A foot spar? What could Nelly possibly want with a foot spar? You'll see, said Nelly triumphantly. Wait till Mum shows up, and you'll see. Chapter 10. Nelly's mum arrived from one direction in the red family maestro, just as Drip and Drop arrived from the other direction in a white taxi. There had never been so many cars parked on that particular stretch of the canal all at one time. At the sight of the police car and the forensic van, all three parents dashed from their vehicles and rushed to the houseboat. Nelly did the explaining. And now I need the foot spar, she concluded. You did go back for the foot spar, didn't you, Mum? Nelly's mum nodded. Your dad wasn't very happy, but it's on the back seat. OK, we need to fill it with water, said Nelly, taking full command of the investigation.
Water is one thing we're not short of, chuckled Plop, offering to fill the foot spar from the canal. Electricity is, said Plip, noticing the plug lead trailing across the towpath as Nelly's mum lifted the foot spar from the car. Oh dear, said Nelly. I forgot you didn't have electricity. Look, Keeper's cottage,
piped Drip.
There's electricity there.
Let's go, said Nelly, taking the foot spar from her mum, clasping it to her chest and racing up the canal path. Drip, Drop, Plip, Plop, Seaview, Sergeant Shrew, Nelly's mum, PC Plum and the forensic team followed hard on her heels. They didn't know why they were following exactly, it just seemed like the right thing to do. Nelly seemed to be the only person around that had a clue what to do. What was the weather like on the day of the bank robbery? Shouted Nelly over her shoulder as she raced past the demolition site.
I don't know,
panted Sergeant Shrew, already out of breath.
PC Plum, what was the weather like the day of the robbery?
Wheezed PC Plum, staggering past the seed factory.
I don't know either. Call yourself a policeman,
panted Sergeant Shrew. It was a windy day, shouted Nelly, heading towards the gasworks. That's why one of the robbers' masks looked so wobbly. It didn't fall off, it blew off in the wind.
It was a windy day,
wheezed Sergeant Shrew, relieved to see the dayboat stretch of the canal approaching.
Write that in your notebook, PC Plum, and next time be more observant.
A concertina of panting bodies crunched into the oak-stained wooden panels of the lock-keeper's door. Nelly's mum blew hard and put her hands on her hips. The forensic team doubled over with their hands on their knees, and the Water Greeps dropped down onto all fours. Sergeant Shrew and PC Plum gasped and gulped for oxygen like fishes out of water as Nelly lifted the heavy brass knocker on the lock-keeper's door and rapped hard. The lock-keeper opened the door and then sprang back in horror as a stampede of police uniforms, white coats and sparkling yellow disco jumpers burst through the door.
Police!
Shouted Sergeant Shrew, thrusting his ID badge up the lock-keeper's nose.
I'm commandeering your plug sockets.
The melee of bodies tumbled past the lock-keeper and into his lounge. "There's one," said Nelly, skidding across the carpet on her knees and wrenching the standard lamp plug out of the wall. "Water," she said. "Will someone fill this foot spa with clean water from the tap?" "Hot or cold?" asked PC Plum, taking the foot spa from Nelly's outstretched arms. "Cold," said Nelly. The lock-keeper reeled into the lounge in a daze and then led PC Plum through to the kitchen. With a squeak of the cold tap, the foot spa was filled and carefully carried back into the lounge. "Put it down here on the carpet, please," said Nelly. As PC Plum obliged, Nelly pushed the plug from the foot spa firmly into the socket on the wall. Everyone, including the lock-keeper, gathered around Nelly and waited to see what she would do next. Nelly knelt beside the foot spa and smiled like a TV detective. If it was a windy day, then the surface of the canal wouldn't have been smooth. It would have been choppy.
"Write that down,"
whispered Sergeant Shrew to PC Plum. Nelly eased backwards and pulled the 3 police mugshots from her jeans pocket. "There would have been ripples on the surface of the water," she continued.
"And that too,"
whispered the sergeant. So when Seaview looked up at the robbers looking down, their faces could have appeared different. They could have been distorted by the ripples on the surface. Their foreheads could have looked deeper, their eyes could have been further over to the right, and their chins could have been further over to the left. Their whole heads could have had a curvier shape altogether. "I'm running out of paper," whispered PC Plum.
"I'm docking the next pad out of your wages,"
murmured Sergeant Shrew under his breath. Nelly beckoned to Seaview. "Hold these photographs under the surface of the water, Seaview, and then take another look."
"But they'll get wet,"
protested Sergeant Shrew.
"You can't wet police property."
"If they get wet, you get your man, or men," countered Nelly. Seaview puffed out his chest, squeezed through between his mum and dad, and then knelt down on the carpet beside Nelly. Taking the first photograph between his 2 longest fingers, he leant forward and placed it face up in the clear water. Nelly flicked the switch on the foot spa. The water began to stir slightly. "How's that?" she asked.
A little more,
said Seaview. Nelly turned the dial on the front of the foot spa 2 more notches to the right, and the water began to ripple. The forehead under the water lengthened, and the eyes and chin swerved in opposite directions.
That's him,
shouted Seaview excitedly.
That's one of the men I saw staring down into the canal.
"Are you positive?"
said Sergeant Shrew excitedly.
Absolutely positive.
Piped Seaview, placing another photograph into the foot spa.
And that's him, and that's the other one, he peeped. I'm absolutely, definitely, positively certain that these are the 3 men who dropped the shotguns into the canal that day.
Nelly clapped her hands. We've caught all 3 robbers! PC Plum threw his pencil into the air, and the sergeant began hopping happily around the floor like a 2-legged frog.
You should think about becoming a water grape,
laughed Seaview. Nelly was carried back to the canal boat shoulder high. Who's that waiting for us? She said, pointing down the towpath to the cars. It was the taxi driver standing with his arms folded beside the boat. In the pandemonium and excitement, Drip and Drop had run off down the towpath without paying for their taxi journey. Not only had the meter been running all this time, but the taxi driver's boot was full of anchors, and he wasn't about to lift them out. Don't worry, smiled Nelly. The reward money will pay for your cab fare.
And some new bikes,
piped Seaview. It had been one of Nelly's best monster-sitting adventures ever. She had made 5 new friends, solved a crime, and been given a booklet by the lockkeeper full of free summer day boat vouchers. Sergeant Shrew had invited her to a tour around the police station, and PC Plum had promised that if ever she needed a prison cell to lock Asti in, he would see what he could do. Mum had met her first monsters, the mist had vanished from Nelly's watch, her clothes had dried out, and during the celebrations afterwards, she'd even nibbled her first bulrush. Not to be recommended. Who are you monster sitting for next? Asked her mum, steering the maestro across the cobbles past the gasworks. Who knows? Smiled Nelly. There's more monsters out there than I ever realised. I'll just have to wait for the phone to ring. Nelly the Monster Sitter, Grerks, Squurms and Water Greeps by Kes Gray was read by Kate Sachs and is published by BBC Audiobooks.